Deep within the serene landscapes of Hokkaido, Japan, a curious and eerie tale unfolds at the Meninji Temple, where the spirit of a young girl named Okiku is said to endure through a remarkable doll. This doll, a silent witness to a bygone era, has become an enigmatic relic, serving as a bridge between the living and the supernatural. Our story begins in the year 1918, when a 17-year-old boy from Hokkaido embarked on a fateful journey to a local market. His mission? To acquire a doll for his 2-year-old sister, Okiku. The doll he chose to bore a striking resemblance to Okiku herself, both of them sharing the iconic Okappa hairstyle, a bowl cut with a straight hair cascading down to the chin. The bond between Okiku and her doll was immediate and profound. She cherished it so dearly that she took it with her everywhere, even cradling it as she drifted off into sleep. Tragically, Okiku's young life was cut short just a few months later, leaving her family to grapple with the grief of her untimely passing. In her memory, they gave the doll a name, Okiku, and enshrined it at their household shrine. With deep reverence, they began to offer prayers to the doll in hopes of preserving a connection with their departed loved one. However, it didn't take long for the family to realize that something profoundly unsettling was happening. A doll, which had been a comforting presence, began to exhibit a bizarre and unnerving transformation. Its hair, which had been meticulously cut, began to grow, gradually extending in length. Even when the family resorted to trimming the hair, it stubbornly persisted in regrowing. It was at this moment that the family realized that they had unwittingly ventured into a realm where the ordinary and the inexplicable converged. In response to this inexplicable phenomena, Kiku's father decided to relinquish the doll, entrusting it to the care of the Meninji Temple in Iwamizawa City, Hokkaido. To this day, the uncanny doll has been visited at the temple, though visitors are not permitted to capture its image in photographs. In a bid to unravel the mystery, scientists have subjected the doll to rigorous analysis, leading to a conclusion that sends shivers down one's spine. The doll's hair is not a synthetic material, but actual human hair. And more eerily, it's believed to have originated from a child. The remote location of the Meninji Temple poses a significant challenge for those seeking to visit. Without access to a vehicle, reaching the temple becomes an arduous endeavor, especially in the face of heavy snowfall. For those intrigued by the supernatural and keen to experience the presence of this bewitched doll, some ghost tours do offer the opportunity to visit the Meninji Temple. Although these tours are typically conducted in Japanese, this unsettling tale brings to the fore the profound and otherworldly mysteries that continue to linger in the heart of Japan. Okiku's doll at the Meninji Temple stands as a testament to the inexplicable, a story that blurs the line between the ordinary and the paranormal, and a reminder that the echoes of the past persist in shaping the present. In the historical annals of Japan, a chilling and dark practice known as Itobashira casts a shadow over the nation's architectural heritage. This disturbing tradition persisted until the 16th century, involving a gruesome ritual where live individuals were immersed within the very structural foundations of the building. The belief was that such sacrifices would appease the gods, enlisting the divine protection to safeguard these edifices against the looming threat of enemy attacks. Our journey into the past takes us to the Maroka Castle, nestled in the serene region of the Sakai-Fuki Prefecture. It is made up of the most infamous tales associated with the practice of Hitobashira unfolds. Amid the castle's construction, an ominous delay following all efforts of reinforcement. Faced with this perplexing and dire challenge, the workers found themselves considering the creation of a Hitobashira, a human sacrifice. In an eerie twist of fate, the chosen victim was a woman named Shizu. Her acquaintance to this grim fate, however, was underpinned by a challenging condition. She stipulated that her son for the sacrifice, who granted the prestigious title of samurai. The decision was made, and Shizu was entombed within the very walls of Morocco Castle, a haunting act that would forever mark the castle's history. Today, the castle stands as an iconic military base's building. Visitors beneath this natural wonder, an unsettling history lurks, one where the boundaries for every spring, as the rains pour and the castle moats overflow, it is believed to be a manifestation of Shizu's sorrow, an eerie reminder of the human sacrifices made in the name of construction and protection. In the world of modern urban legends, a perplexing and unsettling story emerges, a narrative that took shape within the digital realm during the early years of personal computing in the 1990s within Japan. This unsettling story reveals the mystery's phenomena referred to as the Red Room Curse, a legend that not only encapsulates the very essence of fear in the age of technology, it also stands as a disconcerting testament to the expected ramifications of progress in the digital
Gold.
era. The genesis of this ominous legend lies within the blossoming era of personal computers in Japan, a time when the digital realm was slowly permeating the lives of individuals. The curse in its earliest form commences with an unsettling pop-up, the harbinger of doom, which materializes on the victim's computer screen. It is crucial to note that this eerie encounter unfolds when one is alone in a room, thus intensifying the inherent isolation of the experience. The pop-up, sinister in its design, poses a stark red background adorned with black letters, delivering a single haunted question. Do you like the Red Room? What makes this digital apparition even more disquieting is the impossibility of escaping its malevolent grasp. Victims find themselves ensnared in a digital web of malevolence as they are rendered powerless to close the pop-up, which remains frozen on the screen like a silent specter of impending doom. However, the most bone-chilling aspect of the Red Room Curse lies not in the tormenting digital apparition itself, but in the sinister consequences it heralds. When ensnared in this malicious virtual trap, the doors and windows of the physical room where the victim resides are abruptly and inexplicably sealed shut, leaving them trapped within the confines of their own terror. The room morphs into a prison, devoid of escape, and a sinister curse takes hold. Days later, a macabre discovery is made, and the fate of the victim becomes tragically evident. The victim is found lifeless, ensnared within the very walls of the room, which have been transformed into a sinister canvas painted with the crimson hue of blood. The insidious curse's ultimate conclusion is death, shrouded in a gruesome spectacle that leaves investigators and onlookers horrified by the nightmarish scene. The Red Room Curse insidiously weaves its way into the dark corners of the internet, capturing the imagination and dread of those who dare to venture into its depths. The legend took a particularly chilling turn when it became inextricably linked with a real-life tragedy: the murder of a 12-year-old girl in Sasebo, Nagasaki, at the hands of her classmate. The alleged murderer, an 11-year-old at the time, had a bookmark on her computer, providing a direct link to a red room, thus intertwining the horrors of the digital world with real-life acts of unimaginable violence. Woven within the mysterious tapestry of urban folklore, a profoundly sinister and spine-chilling narrative emerges: the legend of the Akamoto, a a tale that finds its genesis in the heinous acts of a real-life murderer who forever left a blood-stained imprint in 1906. This eerie tale waves a narrative that transcends the boundaries of time, transforming a historical crime into a modern legend that continues to haunt the imagination. The origins of the Akamanto story are deeply rooted in a chilling and real-life series of events, where a ruthless criminal kidnapped and took the lives of 3 innocent victims, dressed in a conspicuous blue blanket. This murderer terrorized the region and forever etched his name within the history books of fear. However, with many legends, the Akamanto story has evolved over the years. In its contemporary incarnation, the Akamanto is often depicted wearing a long, blood-red cape and concealing his face behind a haunting white mask. His malevolent presence is closely associated with the most vulnerable of moments, as unsuspecting victims find themselves in a rather compromising position. The Akamanto appears like a malevolent specter, lurking in the most intimate and private spaces. His sinister ritual commences as he presents the victim with a sinister choice, a haunting query: red
Do
cape,
you want to play a game?
This dreadful ultimatum is just the beginning of a horrifying ordeal that lies ahead. In some iterations of the legend, the Akamanto introduces an equally grim choice: red paper or blue paper. This perverse addition takes place when the victim, already entangled in a nightmarish scenario, discovers there is no toilet paper to aid them in the act of wiping. The ordeal is transformed into a macabre game of choice. The consequences of these choices are nothing short of horrifying. If a victim selects red, the Akamanto enacts a gruesome decapitation, causing the victim's life force to pour out like a red cape, an image both terrifying and grotesque. Opting for blue invites a no less gruesome fate, as the Akamanto tightens his spectral grip, choking the life from the victim, turning their body an eerie shade of blue. In the face of this sinister ultimatum, victims have one glimmer of hope: to defy the Akamanto by offering a response rather than red or blue, or even choosing to remain silent. This defiance, as small as it may seem, may serve as a lifeline, potentially thwarting the Akamanto's sinister intentions. Amidst the dark and cryptic realm of the mysterious, there exists a disturbing poem known as Tamino's Hell. This unsettling composition is shrouded in ominous whispers, believed to be an incantation that may bring demise to those brave or foolhardy enough to recite its verses aloud. A grim representation is painted within its haunting verses. This poetic creation has etched itself a unique and foreboding place within the annals of eerie literature endeavors. Penned by the poet Saijo Yashu, the disturbing poem found its place within a collection of verses in the year of 1919. The haunting narrative centers around a young boy named Tamino, whose plight leads him in a harrowing journey through the 8 levels of hell. His older sister throws up blood, his younger sister spits fire, and innocent Tamino vomits his soul. Alone, Tamino falls into the darkest of hells, where even flowers do not bloom. Does Tamino's older sister crack the whip? The crimson lash weighs on his mind, beating and striking, yet not breaking him entirely. On the infinite 8th, hell's only road, I pray for guidance in this darkest hell, to lead sweet Tamino towards the golden sheep, the nightingale. Put all you can into the leather sack, to journey into the deepest hell. Spring awakens in the forests and valleys, and to the 7th twisting valleys of dark hell. The nightingale in the cage, the sheep in the cart, and tears in the eyes of dear Tamino. Sing, nightingale, scream in the raining forest for the beloved little sister. The cry sounds of all throughout hell, and the fox peony opens its petals. Around the 7 mountains and 7 valleys of hell, innocent Tamino makes his journey alone. If they too are in hell, bring them. The mountain of needles and pins. The red pins don't pierce, but merely mark. Sweet Tamino. Yet the interpretation of this poem is as multifaceted as it is macabre. Some readers and scholars find it as a dark allegory, where Tamino's soul is condemned due to the unforgivable act of having killed one of his own parents. Within the tenets of the Buddhist belief, there exists a specialized chamber in hell designated for those who commit such heinous acts, a sin of the utmost gravity. Others interpret the poem as a harrowing metaphor for the horrors of war, where Tamino, upon entering the abyss of the armed conflict, faces a death that is anything but peaceful, forever severed from his beloved family. The poem's aura of supernatural malevolence extended into the realm of cinema when in 1974, director Tairama Shoshi adapted Tamino's hell into a movie, Danin Nieshu, or Pastoral, To Die in the Country. This transformation of eerie verses into a cinematic experience added to the legend's mystique. Ironically, the director met an untimely demise at the age of 50, a tragic event contributing to liver disease, which only deepened existing rumors that reciting the poem aloud unleashed suffering and death. Strangely and perhaps mercifully, it has been suggested that reading the poem silently within one's thoughts carry no dire consequences. This particular exception may provide solace to those who inadvertently encounter the dreadful lines. The ominous specter of this poem serve as a reminder that the border between folklore and reality can be more chilling than we dare to imagine. In the sinister archives of Japanese elementary school folklore, few entities are as infamous and spine-chilling as Torino Hakunoaka-san. Courage defies reason, perhaps a hint of sheer recklessness. The enigmatic origins of Hanako-san shroud her existence in mystery. Some disturbing tales suggest that she was a tragic victim of a merciless air raid during the turmoil of World War II, huddled inside a bathroom stall as her school was engulfed in flames. Others recount an even more gruesome narrative, contending that Hanako-san sought refuge in the school restroom to escape from her murderous parents. Regardless of the version, tale, painting her as a pitiful figure. What remains unequivocally clear, however, is the sinister location that ties Hanako-san to the mortal realm. It is within the confines of the third stall on the third floor of a school bathroom, where her spectral presence is said to linger. To summon her, one must perform a ritualistic act of tapping on the door, knocking 3 times while posing a question. Hanako-san, imashiwaka? Or, Hanako-san, are you there? Serves as an eerie incantation. The atmosphere thickens as, without fail, a faint and forlorn voice emerges from behind the door, replying, It is at this moment that dread begins to taint the air, sending shivers down the spine as one who dared to invoke her name. With agonizing sluggishness, the chilling crimson clawing her way out of the toilet. A glance at her twisting visage is enough to chill the very marrow of one's bones. But the true horror lies not in this gruesome revelation, for Nahako-san's nefarious intentions soon become apparent. Swiftly and malevolently, she seizes her summoner, into the depths of hell. From this point onward, The victim's fate is sealed, forever entwined with the ghostly legend of Hanako-san. During Japan's Edo period, a time steeped in honor and tradition, a haunting legend began to take shape. It was an era when beauty was exalted and concealed truths lurking in the shadows, which had a way of emerging. Our story commences with the tale of a captivating wife wed to a samurai whose radiant couldn't escape the prying eyes of those around her. She became ensnared by the flattery of other men, leading to growing suspicions of infidelity in the heart of her husband. The samurai, unable to bear the weight of his wife's alleged betrayal and the shame that it brought, found himself consumed by fury. One fateful night, he confronted her, accusing her of violating their sacred vows. Overwhelmed by rage, he unleashed his anger upon her, subjugating her to a merciless behavior. In a frenzied state, the husband seized the knife and maured his wife's face, with a permanent kiss. The woman's torment did not conclude with the brutal assault. Shortly after the domestic violence, she met her tragic end. But her suffering and her legend were far from over. Emerging from the depths of her despair, she transformed into a vengeful spirit, Kuchisaki-onna. The origins of the Kuchisaki-onna, also known as the slit-mouthed woman, remain cloaked in mystery. Some historians suggest a genesis, while others debate its emergence in the 1970s and 80s. Kuchisaki was depicted as a disfigured woman, her mouth grotesquely slashed open from ear to ear. She is face with a claw. The chilling legend recounts how the Kuchisaki-onna stealthily approaches her victims in darkness, asking them, "Watashi kare?" or "Do you think I'm beautiful?" If the victim answers in the affirmative, she unveils her mask to reveal a bloody, dripping, horrifying smile. She then inquires in a gruesome tone if they still find her beautiful. Even now, if the victim answers or screams in terror, she replicates her own mutilation, slashing them from ear to ear. If they lie and reply affirmatively once more, she will depart, only to track her victim home and ruthlessly that very night. In a more contemporary twist, the Kuchisaki-onna is said to have been a plastic surgery operation, haunting the streets in a trench coat and a surgical mask. She While this legend is said to be nothing more than folklore, in 2007, a coroner found records of similarly shocking cases during the time and day that the stories took place. And in the evening, the record showed that many young individuals had died at night. Rumoring sightings of a woman with similar features were at the time and place of their deaths. Where did this alleged legend? Regardless of your beliefs, it's advised to tread cautiously through the evening streets, and should you ever encounter a seemingly beautiful young woman donning a mask, you just might not make it home that night.
Spooky, spooky, spooky. That's some fucked up fucking urban legends in Japan, man. Telling you. It's some fucked up shit. I found a gold vein. I got a way to get down there. What the fuck? Why the fuck did it pop my fucking shit off the fucking back of that? Fucking trash. Fucking bullshit. God damn it. Twin lines, poop and rock. All the gold must be mine. One ginormous turd boulder. It's a rock and roll beat. Pooping out the rocks. Hi, Silky. How are ya? How you doing? How you feeling, buddy? Going to do this. Oops. That's not what I wanted. Still alive? That's good. Sexy motherfucker! So, since how you're in here, when is your surgery supposed to happen? I know you got that coming up. I just don't know when it is.
'68-year-old Edwin Curtis is being
On the 22nd of this month, right? So October 22nd. Anything bad happens. Ooh, 8 in the morning. Ugh. So you're getting a disc replaced, right? They're not like fusing your spine or nothing like that. Or had they tried to do that already? Have they tried to fuse your spine? Because I know that getting your spine fused, or I forget what they call the little brace lines that they put on there are called, but I know both of those suck. It's like one of the worst things that you can get done. Placing with an artificial one, yeah. So we can call you the bionic goat. Not that that would technically be accurate, but we could call you a bionic goat. Because you have fake parts in you. We have the technology. Oh, $6 million goat. Like the $6 million man, but not. Sorry, I don't mean to make jokes about shit, but that's just how I am. True, true. At least it's only one disc. It's not like having your entire spine fused or getting the two rails run up next to your spine to keep it all in place. Ugh. So many fucking items on my screen. I can't see what's going on. It's probably just, I don't want to say this, but it's probably just a birth defect that's always been there, and now it's just finally worn out, you know? Shit like that happens. I mean, I was fine up till about 10 years ago, and then my knees just, that was it. They were done. They're, they're fucked. So that's, 30 years of kneeling down on concrete will do that to you. So I know where mine came from, but shit like that does happen. It's, your shit fucking wears out, you know? Nothing lasts forever. Well, the good thing is you're only 37, so healing up from it and moving forward, you're in a better position than most people who have fucked up spines usually are. So, or people who get replacement joint surgeries of any kind, normally they're twice your age when that shit happens. So, you're getting it repaired now is better than getting it repaired when you're much older. So, and your recovery time should be half of what it normally would be for somebody who's older than you in their 40s or 50s. So, I know that's a good thing. Recovering from shit like that is so hard, especially on when you're older. If I was going to have replacement surgeries, I'd rather have it done when, you're real young and your body can bounce back from it really fast. So as you get older, things take longer to heal up. So, yeah, see, if everything goes right, a month, 30 days compared to 6 months, that's like lightning fast compared to that kind of shit. So, which is really, really good. I mean, that's a pretty good estimate. You too, buddy. Definitely get some good sleep. Hopefully, we'll see you back here soon. It'd be nice. You keep everybody posted at what's going on. Good night. Sleep well, or if not well, try to get as much sleep as you can when you can. Get a good, comfortable position, or as comfortable as you can make yourself. We'll be here listening to, oh, speaking of which, we'll put on some creepy pasta shit for you while you're drifting off to sleep.
68-year-old Edwin Curtis is being pushed to the brink of insanity by an unrelenting itch.
The itching is driving me crazy.
Welcome to Watch Mojo. And today we're counting down our picks for the top 20 urban legends that turned out to be true. For this list, we'll be looking at stories so bizarre that most people would dismiss them as fiction, except that they happen to be real, or at least based on real events. Do you know of another strange urban legend that turned out to be true, despite all the odds? Tell us about it in the comments. Number 20. Animals in the toilet. How could an animal possibly get into someone's toilet, especially with modern plumbing? The networks of curving pipes, flowing water, and germ-killing chemicals are enough to deter most creatures, but not all. Snakes are particularly good at navigating pipes, and they like cool places. They've been spotted in toilets around the world.
Everybody asks me, why didn't I video camera take pictures? Well, that wasn't my first concern when I see a snake come out of the toilet.
And while they're not usually venomous, you still don't want to sit on them. The other most common culprits are rats. These hardy rodents can climb, swim, and wriggle through tiny spaces with amazing agility. However, someone who has just been bitten on the butt while trying to use the bathroom may not be so impressed. Number 19. Murderers through the medicine cabinet.
There's no wall there. There's only a medicine chest separating us from the apartment. Wait, what are you doing? There could be somebody on the toilet. I mean, the apartment's vacant. Are you sure?
The 1992 movie Candyman introduced audiences to a scene that has become almost cliche. A villain bursts through a bathroom mirror to attack an unsuspecting victim. What many viewers don't know is that this scene is based on a terrifying true story. In 1987, a woman named Ruthie Mae McCoy called 911 from her Chicago housing project, saying frantically that men were coming in through her bathroom wall. Unfortunately, police made only minimal efforts to enter her locked apartment, giving up that evening and the next, even after reports of gunshots. A neighbor insisted that the building managers check on Ruthie, and they discovered her body. The murderers, who were never apprehended, had broken in through the bathroom medicine cabinet. Number 18. Charlie No Face. Kids growing up in Pennsylvania in the mid-20th century all heard stories of Charlie No Face, the green man who haunted a railroad tunnel at night. Teens dared each other to go out looking for him. People in Coppell, Beaver County, knew the truth. Charlie No Face did exist, and his name was Raymond Robinson. Growing up, Robinson was severely electrocuted, lost his eyes, nose, and right arm. As an adult, Raymond would go for long walks at night on State Route 351. He was sometimes beaten or picked up and dropped off in unfamiliar locations. Others were kind, however, bringing him cigarettes and beer. He died in 1985 at the age of 74. Number 17. A fake word in the dictionary.
People think of English as something that needs to be defended, right? Like, it's this beautiful, pristine tower. Actually, it's much more like a child.
Can we trust the dictionary? What if a sneaky editor decided to play a prank on the world? Well, that hasn't happened as far as we know, but the 1934 edition of Webster's New International Dictionary did include a fake word. The word was Dord, spelled D-O-R-D, and defined as density.
How did this happen? Well, it all started when a 3x5 slip of paper dated July 31st, 1931, arrived from one of our chemistry consultants.
This mistake occurred when someone misread a note from the chemistry editor that featured an uppercase D followed by the word or and a lowercase d. They thought the spaces had been left for pronunciation symbols. An editor did flag the mistake in 1939, but it wasn't corrected until 1947. Number 16. Accidental self-defenestration.
Did somebody say waffles?
Leave window testing to the
I had
engineers.
brain damage.
In the summer of 1993,
Hi, Looney.
Gary Hoy threw himself through the 24th story window of the Toronto Dominion Center in front of several students. Apparently, he was impressed with the architecture of the building and had performed this stunt several times in the past to show how strong the windows were. The window didn't break, but it did come right out of its frame, and Hoy hurtled to his death. The tragic accident contributed to the demise of the well-known law firm Holden A. Wilson.
Could you make a cup of tea, please, Stephanie?
Number 15. The Bunny Man.
A manhunt discovered a trail of half-eaten rabbits left on the
Figure
ground,
out all the little
hanging in
kinks
trees.
for the
Though his name
PC.
suggests cuddliness, the urban legend
What do you
about
mean,
this Virginia man is pretty gruesome.
little
In the
kinks?
story, a patient escapes a mental hospital and hangs rabbits, then children, from a bridge in Fairfax County in 1904. This probably never happened, but in 1970, two odd incidents did occur in Fairfax. A couple parked in a driveway were confronted by a man dressed in white who may, quote, have had something on his head. He threw a hatchet at the car window before disappearing.
Minor stuff.
Then a security guard claimed to have seen a rabbit man chopping up a porch with an axe. The bunny man disappeared after that. The locals have not forgotten him, his axe, or his floppy ears.
Well, there's always problems. Always gonna be issues.
14. Flying with balloons. It may sound like something from an animated movie, but it really happened.
So long, boy! I'll send you a postcard from Paradise Bowl.
A man named Larry Walters attached 45 helium balloons to a plastic lawn chair and floated off into the California sky. Unlike in stories, however, such ventures don't always go as planned. Larry found himself rising all the way up to 16,000 feet, where several astonished airline pilots spotted him and notified air traffic control.
Larry Walters had always dreamed of flying a balloon to a faraway place. So with help from a friend who taped these scenes, he rigged 42 weather balloons to a lawn chair and filled them with helium.
On descent, Larry's craft got caught in power lines. He was arrested.
No song requests.
You can't revoke someone's pilot license if they don't have one, and airworthiness certificates are rarely issued for lawn chairs.
The chair had come just underneath the power lines and was swung into this backyard, and there were some people that were tracking him, and they got there and grabbed the chair as he came swinging in to hold it.
Number 13, animals in the sewer.
Dun dun
Since sewers
dun.
were invented, people have been worried about creepy critters living there. For the ancient Romans, it was octopuses.
I don't know how to do song requests
And for Stephen
while having everything run through the capture
there are
card.
some documented cases of unusual animals in sewers.
I don't know how to fix that.
As legend claimed, but they do turn up in sewers along the eastern coast of the U.S.
Yeah, there's no song requests because everything's being channeled through my capture card.
Snapping turtles
So
were found in New York sewers in 1988, and in 2015,
song requests are gone.
had to be rescued from a storm drain in Florida. Maybe octopuses weren't so far-fetched after all. Number 12, Cropsey.
Our camp counselors would lead us down this path and then come out of the buildings and scare us.
The truth behind Cropsey may be worse than the legend. Cropsey was an alleged boogeyman who would supposedly catch and kill kids near the Willowbrook State School on Staten Island, New York. The school itself was horrifying enough. Students there were subjected to abuse, neglect, and unsanitary conditions until it closed in 1987. That same year, a missing girl's body was discovered on school grounds, and Andre Rand, a former janitor at Willowbrook who still lived there, was convicted of kidnapping her.
Did they get a crazy man and just say he's the guy, or did they really have good evidence against him that would stick in a court?
He was also a suspect in several similar cases and was convicted on another kidnapping charge while serving time.
He's not going to testify. I'm very disappointed to say. It seemed like he was wanting to divulge information. Of course, not
Song
necessarily confess
request
to anything, but
Daisy.
certainly he was very antsy, and that seemed like a good sign to people who might like to try to get information out of him.
Number 11, someone hiding in the back seat.
Oh no, what's this?
A woman is driving home at night, when suddenly the car behind her starts flashing its headlights, or the gas station attendant tries to get her attention. It turns out they were trying to alert her to the man hiding in her back seat. The details seem to be made up, but there have been cases where men have snuck into women's cars, although the urban legend precedes them. In 2013, a man got into a woman's van while she was at a gas station in Hammond, Indiana, and abducted her. 3 years later, a woman was parking her car in Maple Ridge, British Columbia, Canada, when a man popped up in the back seat, causing her to crash. She ran away, as did the suspect. Killer elevators.
Elevators.
We're sure it sounds familiar. A person steps into an elevator, but suddenly it goes crazy and kills them. While such incidents are rare, they have happened. 2003, a 35-year-old surgical resident in Texas was entering a hospital elevator after his colleague when the doors began to close, and didn't stop. The doctor was trapped between them. Though his colleague frantically pushed the emergency stop button, it was too late. The elevator began going up. With his upper body inside the car and his lower body outside, the doctor didn't stand a chance. Obviously, multiple safety measures usually prevent this sort of thing. The incident was blamed on faulty wiring. Number 9. The Toxic Lady.
I have DayZ songs.
Her real name was Gloria Ramirez. She had late-stage cervical cancer and was deteriorating rapidly when she came to the ER. She died less than an hour later. But Ramirez had a bizarre effect on the hospital staff. Multiple people who treated her suffered odd symptoms: fainting, shortness of breath, even temporary paralysis.
For the autopsy 6 days later, the coroner's office built a specially sealed room. The staff was protected with hazardous duty suits. Afterwards, everyone was hosed down with decontaminants.
A team wearing hazmat suits performed her autopsy, but couldn't explain why those around her had fallen ill. Most experts dismissed it as mass hysteria, until the coroner's office found that Ramirez had been trying to treat herself with dimethyl sulfone cream. When exposed to oxygen, this creates a vapor that affects people like poison gas.
I asked the nurse to start an IV that, about coincidentally at the same time, I smelled, ammonia. To me, it was ammonia. And I kind of made a comment that, it's really strong ammonia. And I kind of felt, like I was going to pass out then.
Number 8, a secret murder. Although Betsy Ardsma died in 1969, the circumstances of her death were so strange that the case still haunts Penn State University. Ardsma, a graduate student, was browsing in an aisle of the library when people nearby heard books fall. They found her lying senseless on the floor, and she was brought to the campus hospital, where a doctor was shocked to discover something no one else suspected. Ardsma had been murdered. The killer had only stabbed her once, and in such a way that she hardly bled at all. Because it took so long to realize a crime had been committed, most evidence at the scene was lost. The phantom killer was never found. Number 7. Dead people mistaken for Halloween decorations.
In fact, I didn't know what happened until I'd already died. I saw the blood.
That was part of a 911 call made by a man in Tennessee who was heading to work. He made the call after he saw what appeared to be a dead body lying in his neighbor's driveway.
You've probably noticed that Halloween decorations have been getting more and more gruesome and realistic. This has led to a strange problem: people mistaking real dead bodies for fake ones. This happened in 2005 in Frederica, Delaware, and in 2009 in Marina del Rey, California, after the bodies of people who had taken their own lives were thought to be Halloween pranks. There was another case in 2014 in Spring Hills, Florida, after a man hanged himself in his garage. A pair of handymen found the body, assumed it was a mannequin, and brought it to a dump, only for the landfill workers to note that it was in fact a corpse.
All 4 of them convinced themselves that it was some Halloween type prop. Obviously they felt it was very realistic.
That's because it was real.
Maybe we should tone down the decorations just a little bit. Number 6, buried alive.
Take care, Murph.
Being buried alive is many people's biggest fear, and it has certainly happened before when people have been falsely declared dead. Horrifyingly, it's also happened on purpose. In 1987, an Illinois businessman was kidnapped and held for ransom. For some weird reason, the kidnappers buried him in a box with water and a breathing tube. Unfortunately, the tube failed, and by the time police arrived, he was dead. There was another case in 2020 when a man in Jingbian County, Shaanxi Province, China, allegedly buried his 79-year-old mother in a shallow grave. Miraculously, she was reportedly rescued by police who dug her out. Number 5. Bodies in rugs. You may have seen this in movies before. A murderer rolls their victim up in a rug and carries it off without arousing suspicion. It's happened enough in real life to make you wonder if fiction inspired reality or the other way around. For one thing, a discarded carpet doesn't usually attract much attention. In Douglasville, Georgia, a body rolled up in a carpet inside an abandoned house wasn't discovered for months in 2022. Of course, if someone's feet happen to be sticking out of the rug, it's a little more noticeable. A pedestrian spotted one like that in Manhattan in 2019. In both cases, police were unable to determine what had happened. So beware, a rug may be more sinister than it seems. Number 4, secret sharers.
Like, who the heck are you? Why are you in my house? And she keeps kind of going, this is my house. I live here. I've been here for 3 days.
Ever misplaced something at home? You were sure it was right there, but somehow it's in another room. Well, probably you're just misremembering. Otherwise, it's a ghost. Or worse, a secret sharer living in your house. It may sound impossible, but people have pulled it off. In 2017, a woman in Arlington, Virginia thought she heard footsteps overhead after moving into a new apartment. 6 months later, she found the attic door open and discovered someone had been living there. She never knew who it was. In 2008, a Japanese man noticed food and other items going missing, so he installed security cameras in his house. It turned out that a woman was living above his closet and had gone undetected for a year.
싹 잘라놨거든. 나 여기 온 거 아무도 몰라요. 나 잘했지 언니? 잠깐만 더 언니.
Number 3, dead people in drinking water.
When they peered inside,
Ugh,
saw that Lisa
gross.
was floating face up. She was in a considerable state of decomposition.
Sorry, we know it's gross, but it does occasionally happen. One famous case in 2013 was at the Cecil Hotel in California. Guests complained that the water coming from their taps had a strange color and smell. As it turned out, a young woman's body was in the hotel water tank. She had gone missing a few weeks earlier. More recently, as the western U.S. faces a terrible drought, people have been disturbed to find that Lake Mead, one of the largest drinking water reservoirs in the country, contains a number of dead bodies, which are now being exposed as the water recedes. If it makes you feel any better, drinking water that's been around a corpse isn't usually harmful, just really, really disturbing. Number 2, bugs living in people. When an insect flies into your eye or some other part of your face, it's bad for everyone, including the insect, which will likely be swatted. It's the bugs who enjoy being inside people that are truly horrifying. Take itch mites.
Adult mites will often seek out a new host. They do this by hitching a ride on sheets, linens, or through skin-to-skin contact.
They're so tiny you don't even know they've burrowed into your flesh until you develop an itchy rash. You may also be interested to know that some flies pass on parasitic loa worms when they bite. These worms swim around beneath your skin and your eyes, sometimes visibly. They can also inflate your brain and kill you. But unfortunately, getting rid of them is very difficult. If that freaks you out, trust us, not alone.
The doctors prepare the girl for a difficult procedure.
So they lay her in this chair.
I felt helpless, worried.
Before we continue, be sure to subscribe to our channel and ring the bell to get notified about our latest videos. You have the option to be notified for occasional videos or all of them. If you're on your phone, make sure you go into settings and switch on your notifications. Number 1, organ trafficking.
What do you got? Live out. What's that? Live out. What are you hanging out at A?
Although lurid stories about travelers being drugged and waking up missing a kidney have been fabricated, organ trafficking does exist. Desperate need has led to a black market system, where people pay huge sums to receive organ transplants without government oversight. But who are the donors? People as desperate as the ones needing transplants. Refugees, unemployed migrants, families living in abject poverty. They are offered money for their blood or organs. But if they accept, the money often turns out to be less than promised.
Then 2 লাখ পার এগুলা অনেক সংসারের ভেতর কাজ করতে করতে এগুলা সব দিনের মধ্যে আমার টাকাগুলা ঢুকছে ঢুকে আর জায়গা ঠিক করা যায়।
Weakness from medical procedures puts them entirely in the power of the traffickers. Sometimes truth is not only stranger, but also stranger and sadder than fiction.
He's always reminded of what was stolen from him by his guard. His body has to adapt to just 1 kidney.
Did you enjoy this video? Check out these other clips from WatchMojo, and be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos.
Beep, beep.
Throughout my time here on YouTube, I've spent countless hours searching for dark, obscure content from all across the web, and out of all my morbid findings, only about 1% of them have actually been turned into videos. This happens for a few reasons, like some of the material being just too disturbing or too graphic to talk about, but mainly it's because a lot of these topics I found don't really warrant a full video, at least not on my channel. So rather than just holding on to these topics forever, I decided to start a new series here and share with you all the chilling internet content that I've compiled throughout the years and will continue to compile for years to come. So join me in this new venture as we dive into the internet's darkest corners. Before we dive into this, I have to give a huge shout out to our amazing sponsor, Shudder. Shudder is the ultimate streaming service for all fans of horror, which chances are, if you're watching this video, that includes fun, mortuary collection, and so for free for the next 30 days by going to shudder.com.
In the end, you'll decide the ultimate winner. And
Shudder's not sponsored in this stream, so fuck them.
It's been over 15 years since the premiere of the now hit show America's Got Talent, a competition program centered around finding the top entertainers in the country. But despite the show's huge popularity, I was surprised that I hadn't heard about its upcoming spin-off, which was set to air fairly soon. The show is called AGT Extreme, which focuses solely on daredevil acts, a premise that has subsequently caused a bit of a stir online, as having a competition focused on extreme stunts means that people will take things further and further to win, which would lead to their performances getting riskier and riskier over time, pushing the envelope and heightening the danger. With this in mind, many critics have called out the show for how dangerous it could become. And as it turns out, even before the first episode has made it to air, these critics may have already been proven right. On the 15th of October 2021, TMZ would publish an article outlining an incident that had recently happened on the set of the show. The accident supposedly involved 41-year-old Jonathan Goodwin, a man who had performed on AGT before, where he attempted other life-threatening challenges, all of which had gone off without a hitch. But this time was different. The article wrote, Jonathan Goodwin, a daredevil stuntman on the new America's Got Talent Extreme, suffered brutal injuries after a stunt he attempted went horribly wrong, and it was so bad, people on set thought he was dead. The article would then go on to explain the stunt that Jonathan had attempted to perform, and how exactly it all went wrong. Goodwin was suspended 70 feet in the air in a straitjacket, hanging by his feet from a wire. 2 cars were suspended on either side of him, swinging back and forth. The stunt was for Goodwin to free himself from the restraints, and then fall on an air mattress and avoid getting crushed by the cars as they swung in the air. Then something went horribly wrong, and the cars smashed together, sandwiching Goodwin in between them. The impact caused the cars to explode, erupting in a gigantic fireball. Goodwin fell to the ground and hit his head. The article then mentions that Jonathan's exact conditions weren't known, but that his injuries had been incredibly severe, having to be airlifted to a nearby trauma unit. The scene described sounded absolutely crazy, as the stunt Goodwin had performed sounded unlike anything I've ever seen before. And following the release of this story, curious readers wanted to know more, as they wondered whether the ordeal was filmed, and if that footage would ever get released. But according to the article, this had happened on the day of rehearsal, meaning that there was no live studio audience, and the cameras potentially weren't even rolling. And even if the show had been filming, it seemed highly unlikely that they would ever choose to release this footage. However, as it turns out, during the whole event, another camera had actually been recording on set that day, which just so happened to capture the entire thing. It's unclear who was behind the camera, though many believe that it was likely a staff member who had pulled out their phone to film the act. And somewhat unsurprisingly, just days after the initial report, this very video would emerge, quickly spreading to practically every social media site across the internet. The cars are then seen colliding together with extreme force, as Goodwin is pinned between them. At that exact moment, the pyrotechnics in both vehicles go off, causing a massive explosion. Jonathan would then collapse 40 feet to the ground below, falling headfirst. The video is horrifying, and it's easy to understand why people on set thought Goodwin had perished, as every time I watched the clip, I couldn't imagine how anyone could survive such a devastating incident. But shockingly, Goodwin would actually regain consciousness that very day, and despite suffering serious injuries like 2 broken legs and burns throughout his body, he doesn't appear to be in critical condition anymore, as he's even taken to his Instagram page to let his fans know that he's going to be okay. And though his road to a full recovery is clearly going to be difficult, it's still amazing to see him alive and in such good spirits. Following the news breaking on this story, and the video
Hey, if you lived through it, you'd be in good spirits
America's Got
too.
Talent has halted production on the show, and it's currently unclear where they will go from here. Though if they do decide to carry on with its production, I personally find it likely that this won't be the last time we see an accident like this. Our next story takes us to an obscure Reddit post made back in September of 2020. The story was told on the Legal Advice subreddit, as the original poster, or OP, was seeking help on a situation transpiring with their neighbor. OP described the situation as follows: I live in a duplex with my husband and my son, who is only a few months old. My father-in-law owns half of the duplex and is renting to us, and the other half is owned by an older woman and her adult daughter. My father-in-law has known the woman for over 15 years and told us before we moved in that the daughter was mentally ill and had strong delusions on occasion that caused trouble with the previous tenants. The last tenants apparently had to get a civil anti-harassment order placed against the daughter, but eventually moved out when the behaviors never stopped. Apparently, the neighbor accused them of kidnapping and abusing their children, as well as abusing their dogs. My husband and I brought our son home a few months ago, and we didn't have any issues with the neighbor until about 2 weeks ago. She has begun banging on and throwing things at the walls when our son cries. She screams at us as well, but I usually can't hear what she's actually saying, you know, over the screaming baby. And the 2 dogs going absolutely ballistic because of the banging. It's absolute chaos, and it made my postpartum anxiety so much worse. Every time the baby cries, I experience intense panic, waiting for the screaming and the banging to start. We have called the non-emergency police line twice when I can't handle it anymore and I feel close to a meltdown. And the first time they talked to her and she stopped doing it as often, maybe once every 2 days. Tonight she is back and it is worse than ever. The air quality is so bad right now from the fires that I can't let the dogs out for long to stop them from barking. And the barking makes the baby cry harder, which makes the neighbors scream and pound on the walls harder. The officer I spoke with
Get rid of
says
your
that
dogs.
we can try to get a civil anti-harassment order placed, but he knew for a fact that her behaviors never stopped after the last tenants had tried that. And he says his unofficial advice would be to live somewhere else. Is that seriously my only option? We can't afford to move, but I can't keep living like this. The post was met with minimal engagement, as many glossed over the story, not thinking much of it, and those who did respond seemed to have a mixed reaction. Some actually sympathized with their neighbor, as sharing a wall with a screaming baby would obviously not be a fun situation, and especially for someone with a mental illness, who seems to react negatively to loud stimuli. While others found the neighbor's response to be fairly worrisome, as it was clear that the behavior had been escalating. But whichever side these commenters took, they all seemed to be in agreement on one thing, that there wasn't much OP could do, other than simply move out. And with that, the post quickly faded into obscurity, with no resolution to be found, quickly being lost in the endless content of Reddit. But surprisingly, the story wouldn't end there. In fact, nearly 7 months later, an update would be made, thrusting what was once an unknown story into the limelight. OP's post read, "Update. Neighbor bangs on shared duplex wall when baby cries." But the outcome was pretty wild. In October of 2020, and towards the end of September, the neighbor, 40-year-old female, started to for the next 2 months, neighbor bought a megaphone to yell through the wall and threatened to rip us apart and threats until 3 or 4 in the morning. The police were called multiple times. They The elderly mother hadn't been seen in several months, but requests for wellness checks were brushed off. The general advice I got was that as renters we couldn't do anything. It was also suggested that this was reasonable behavior, since the baby crying was probably really annoying. Since my first post, we and occasionally just stare at us. The smell that came from that hole was indescribably bad. It took until the end of January for police to finally be able to enter her property. The elderly mother had been deceased since at least June, and the daughter had the corpse dressed in her Sunday best, rotting in a dead-bolted bedroom. The news article said that the mother died from natural causes. The daughter was taken to an inpatient psychiatric facility. The update came entirely out of left field, yet this lady's timeline made perfect sense, as the daughter's behavior likely escalated not just because of the new child, but also because of the loss of her mother. And without her mother to care for her and keep her in check, it allowed her actions to go way off the deep end, as by the end, she had clearly become completely delusional. However, this is Reddit, and with Reddit comes a slew of fake stories designed to go viral, which alone caused many to instantly write this whole situation off as a hoax. But digging deeper, this doesn't actually seem to be the case, as some would find news articles outlining a virtually identical situation. On the evening of January 29th, a welfare check was conducted at the home of 65-year-old Cynthia Newman. The lady had not been seen in months, and it wouldn't take long for police to figure out why. One article wrote, "The body of Cynthia Newman, 65, was found in a reclining chair with a pillow under her head and body. She was covered in blankets in an attempt to cover the body from sight. Newman's body was covered with insects and showed significant signs of decay, including exposed bone and places where skin was starting to peel off. It also appeared that animals living in the house had started to gnaw at the corpse." Also within the home was Cynthia's daughter, 41-year-old Jacqueline Bebout, who had been living with the corpse for over 7 months, never reporting it to authorities as she, quote, "didn't want to be alone." According to the articles written on this, Cynthia had died due to natural causes, though her daughter would still wind up being arrested on charges of failing to report human remains, with her sentence landing her in a mental health facility. But hearing this story side by side with these two threads, well, it all adds up, right down to the was the smell of a decaying body. What started as just an obscure, forgotten post on Reddit has now shifted into one of its more twisted threads.
When someone dies, it means they're not alive.
Reddit is home to a lot of disturbing content, and it's here that we find another thread, but this one requiring no context for its darkness to be understood. The post was made to Ask Reddit, where a user asks, "Redditors who know how much time they have left, how does your day look like?" The post proceeded to go viral almost instantly, as hundreds of people flocked to tell their stories, with all of the top results coming from those who actually suffered from some type of terminal illness. One user wrote, ALS rapidly progressing. Every day I get worse. Couldn't get my shirt on today. Not really enough strength and energy to eat, though I am being yelled at for losing weight. No pain, for which I am thankful, but unable to do most things we take for granted. I have T-Rex arms now. Probably won't be able to walk or stand in the next few weeks. I am working hard to get the prescription for death with dignity. This is not how I want to live. I think I'll be lucky to make it to Christmas, more like early November at this rate. I don't want to live like this anymore. Another says, my days are a mixed bag. Some days I don't want to get out of bed, and when I do, I can't seem to find the energy to leave the house. I have tumors all over my spine, so when things go really bad for me, my legs will probably be the first to go. This is my time, and it took me a lot of dying before I could take a deep breath and let go of the stress of living. Sometimes the best thing you can do is crack a beer and watch some TV and not feel guilty about it. It's easy to feel like you absolutely need to make each day count, but if I'm happy, I'm happy.
Legend has it that travelers driving on Highway 365 in central Arkansas around Halloween have encountered a young girl in a torn white dress. When they offered to drive her home, things got really weird really fast. Once the young girl was in their car, the driver draped their coat over her shivering shoulders and set off to the address she gave them. But when they got there, she had vanished into thin air. Puzzled, they knock on the door of the house. The woman who answers tells the driver something like, "That girl is my daughter, who died many years ago. She hitchhikes back home around this time every year." For some reason, perhaps to check if the story is indeed true, the driver goes to the cemetery to see her tombstone, where they find their jacket draped over the young girl's grave. Hi, I'm Erin McCarthy, and this is The List Show. Today, we're covering urban legends from all 50 states, ranging from creepy cryptids to deadly curses to some stuff you might have seen on Facebook. Let's get started. Merriam-Webster defines urban legend as an often lurid story or anecdote that is based on hearsay and widely circulated as true, which is why you often see the same types of urban legends popping up all over the place, with distinct local details providing flair. Take our vanishing hitchhiker, for example. In Hawaii, that hitchhiker takes the form of Pele, the goddess of fire and volcanoes, who is said to appear as an old woman walking along the road. She gladly accepts a ride, and then vanishes from the back seat. In Pennsylvania, the hitchhiker is a man in white who once again disappears from the car when they reach his destination. Sometimes the hitchhiker makes a prophetic statement before going poof. In some places, the hitchhiker is combined with another urban legend, La Llorona, the spirit of a weeping woman who cries because she drowned her children. And in Utah, the tale is combined with the Mormon religion's three Nephites. Versions of the vanishing hitchhiker tale involving a car go back to the 1930s. But accounts including carriages, horses, and even two people just walking somewhere date back as far as 1876 and appear in places as far-flung as Russia and Korea. According to folklorist Jan Harold Brunvand in his book The Vanishing Hitchhiker, American Urban Legends and Their Meanings, urban legends are essentially modern folklore, realistic stories concerning recent events, or alleged events, with an ironic or supernatural twist. They are a unique, unself-conscious reflection of major concerns of individuals in the societies in which the legends circulate, at the point in time when they're told. Importantly, in addition to being spread through word of mouth, they're often spread by the media. Because of all of this, urban legends can be pretty repetitive. So we've tried to dig a little deeper for most of the stories we're featuring here. We're also going to talk about some of the classic urban legends you probably know, whether you heard them through the grapevine, found them on social media, or discovered them via the classic 1998 film Urban Legend and its 2000 sequel, Urban Legend's Final Cut. Both movies that I enjoyed a lot. Now, back to the States. When you think about a mythical stairway to hell, chances are you don't picture it in North Dakota, but according to Urban Legend, that's precisely where it's located. In Tagus, to be exact, at the ruins of an old Lutheran church. Go figure. The church burned down in 2001. But it's been rumored to have been a hotbed for satanic activity involving everything from cannibalism to human sacrifice. Its reputation was so notorious that Charles Manson supposedly claimed that if he ever got out of prison, that's where he planned to go. As for the stairway, it was said to be underneath the church, and although now there's just a memorial to mark the site, Some claim that if you get close enough to it, you can hear the screams of the damned as they descend deeper into hell. It's all pretty creepy stuff, but the town of Tagus is interesting too. It was founded in the early 1900s but has since become a ghost town. You can still visit it, and those who have reported feelings of simmering dread as they walk past the vacant houses and rusted out cars that are all the remains of the old community. Just be careful not to rouse the hellhounds. Those are said to roam the empty streets too, snarling and snapping at whoever dares to overstay their welcome. Why visit a ghost town when you could catch a late-night cruise on a ghost ship instead? Over in Wyoming, there's said to be a haunted liner that sails along the North Platte River. Known as the Ship of Death, it appears after a thick, ominous mist rolls over the water, and both the boat and the crew are said to be covered in frost. According to legend, if you spot it, it means that someone you love dearly will die the very same day. The crew supposedly appears on the deck, gathers around a canvas sheet that's draped over a body, and slowly draws back the canvas to reveal the identity of the soon-to-be deceased. The ship was supposedly first sighted back in 1862 by a trapper whose wife or fiancé died shortly thereafter. But eyewitness accounts of this supernatural vessel go well into the 20th century, and it's said to appear about every 25 years or so. On the plus side, at least it's not a carnival cruise. Here's another chilling ship tale. The Le Griffon set off on its maiden voyage in the Great Lakes in 1679. During the trip, it stopped so its crew could trade with the local Native American tribes on an island in Lake Michigan. It was later supposed to set sail to a French military port, but the Le Griffon never arrived there. It was likely the first of many ships to have gone down in the Great Lakes. Though people in recent years have claimed to have found its wreckage, no one actually knows what happened to the ship. People have proposed the typical theories: ransacking, a mutiny, or a storm. But some believe a local prophet's curse is what doomed the ship and crew. The winter of 1697 was rough in Maryland. Crops failed, livestock died, and people perished from the flu. But, as the story goes, instead of blaming the weather or a stroke of poor luck, the townspeople pointed fingers at Moll Dyer, a former indentured servant. She was an elderly woman often spotted begging and foraging around the fringes of society. The people decided she was a witch and was to blame for all the misfortune their town had recently suffered. Shortly after Dyer was driven out of town, her body was found frozen to a boulder. It's said that her handprint remained on the rock long after her corpse was removed, and anyone who touches the stone is said to fall ill. People have suggested that Dyer inspired the Blair Witch Project. Colorado's Riverdale Road doesn't sound like a place you want to find yourself anytime soon. It's apparently host to a phantom jogger who taps on car windows, demon dogs, and demon children, a phantom Camaro with a busted headlight that challenges other drivers to a death race, and, oh yeah, the gates of hell. There's also a phantom woman in white, who is said to be connected to a tragedy in 1975, in which a mansion on the road was burned down by a crazed man with his entire family inside. The man supposedly vanished, and near the ruins you can apparently still hear the screams of his family. Research has cast doubt on whether or not anyone was actually inside the mansion at the time of the 1975 fire, but I'll be avoiding that route on Google Maps anyway, thanks. Let's head over to the Bluegrass State, which is home to its own terrifying road-based legend. Kentucky's Sleepy Hollow Road is a 2-mile-long thoroughfare said to be haunted by a ghostly hearse that materializes out of thin air and aggressively tailgates drivers, trying to force them off the road and into a ravine. We've also mentioned Kentucky's best-known creature, the Pope Lick Monster, half-man, half-goat who lives under a bridge in Louisville, in our video about cryptids, if you want to check that out. And just one more bad road for good measure. In 2016, emails and Facebook posts began popping up in the Ames, Iowa area, warning women drivers to beware of stopping should they see what appeared to be a body in the road. The posts went a little something like this: bizarre punctuation and spelling mistakes, very much original. Warning, women. A coworker was driving back from Ames and saw something laying in the road about the Jefferson area. As she got closer, she noticed it was a body. She kept going and called 911. The officer called her back later and said she was lucky she did not stop because there was 2 guys waiting in the ditch to mug her. I also had a man try to flag me down between Boone and Ogden. So if this happens to you, don't stop and call 911. They are also using dolls in car seats to get women to stop. Repost this to warn others. This is real, Iowa people. Repost it from a friend. Watch KCCI News tonight. The Ames Police Department took to Facebook to let residents know that this warning was actually an urban legend that might have originated in South Africa in the 1990s. We encourage you to call on suspicious activity and use common sense when things don't seem right, the post read. But this one is an urban legend. Down in Mississippi, the most legendary urban legend there has become something of a cornerstone of American folklore. Robert Johnson was a blues singer in the 1930s. He made a local name for himself, and he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1986, when people began recognizing his contribution to the music scene, decades after his mysterious death. His career may now be seen as somewhat legendary, but how he got that talent is a bona fide urban legend. It's said Johnson met the devil at a crossroads and sold his soul to him in exchange for his guitar skills. Could a video game actually make you go insane?
Did somebody say waffles?
No. Even if you knew it could.
Waffles.
Libius made its way into Portland, Oregon
Hi, Vincey.
back in the fall of 1981, and the all-black
How are
ballad
ya?
soon caused quite a stir. Rumor has it that 2 teenagers went missing shortly after playing it, while others who tried it out quickly became addicted, falling into trance-like states that prompted nightmares, seizures, amnesia, and even hallucinations. Some players believe the game was sending them subliminal messages, and to make matters worse, claim to have seen men dressed in black suits removing data records from the machines instead of orders. Libius supposedly disappeared from arcades about a month later and was never spotted again. While many believe the original game never existed in the first place, some speculate that MKUltra, the CIA's real-life Cold War-era mind control project, was behind the whole thing. Either way, it still probably wasn't worse than the Atari ET game. The Rougarou, which we covered in a previous video, isn't the only cryptid prowling around Louisiana swamps. The state is also home to the Grunch. What the Grunch is exactly is unclear. Some say it's a goat-like monster, while others claim it's a group of half-human creatures. The name comes from Grunch Road, which, according to the legends, was a swamp road that has since been paved over. The Grunch, whatever it may be, is said to hunt those who park near its namesake road. If you see an injured goat wandering around the bayou, don't stop. That's how the Grunch lures in its victims. Stull Cemetery in Stull, Kansas is famously home to a gateway to hell, which we mentioned in our video of spooky Halloween stories. Side note, why are there so many entrances to hell in the continental United States? So for this video, we're going with another urban legend, the Hamburger Man of Hutchinson, Kansas. Tales about the Hamburger Man first cropped up in the 1950s, when hikers started to go missing in an area known locally as Hamburger Hill. It said the Hamburger Man was a farmer turned serial killer who had been disfigured in a fire. These days, he's a half-ghost, half-monster. Either way, he purportedly nabs his victims, drags them back to his cabin deep in the woods, and grinds them into hamburger meat. Happy hiking! Let's get off the mainland for a minute. Morgan's Corner on Nu'uani Pali Drive in Oahu was supposedly haunted, and it was actually the site of a real-life murder. In 1948, 2 men escaped from a prison and murdered a widow in her bed. Morgan's Corner is also said to be near the site of an urban legend that many of you might recognize. Here's how the story usually goes. A boy and a girl are parked under a tree at Morgan's Corner late at night, but when the time comes to head home, the car won't start, so the boy leaves to go get help, despite the fact that the girl does not want to be left alone. She starts to hear all kinds of strange noises like thumping and scratching on the roof, and she's so scared she hides on the floor of the car until morning. The police eventually arrive and take her out of the car, warning her not to look back. When she does, she sees her boyfriend hanging from the tree, toes scraping the roof of the car. In The Vanishing Hitchhiker, Brunvand says that this particular tale, which was popular among teens, was first collected in 1964 from a student at the University of Kansas. In some versions of the story, the boyfriend is actually decapitated and is living upside down, instead of his toes scraping. The girl hears the drip, 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 there's blood on the roof all night long. And when the police come and she turns back and sees her dead boyfriend, turns white. The tale is apparently related to another older urban legend you might know. In the 49th State of the Union, some of the urban legends are a bit less present. The year is 1938. Otto Geist is a problem. Residents of the town are pilfering the apparatus he is required as part of his many expeditions for the University of Alaska Fairbanks. In a desperate attempt to save at least some of the stash, Geist and his students take as many as 30 of the tusks and bury them somewhere in the area. Or maybe, as other versions of the story have it, Geist is actually experimenting with preservation of the tusks. Either way, he apparently didn't make a note of where the cache was. And since everyone involved in the burial is long dead, the location of the tusks has been lost to time. That's the legend, anyway. Multiple searches over the decades, through both archives and in the field, have unearthed some tantalizing clues, but so far, no tusks, which, if found, could be worth up to $1 million, depending on their condition. You've probably heard about the Bermuda Triangle before, but did you know that there's another one said to be located right in Oklahoma? Reports of strange events in Beaver Dunes Park go all the way back to the 16th century, when 3 Spanish conquistadors supposedly vanished in a flash of green light as they searched for gold in the dunes. Over the years, there have been other strange disappearances too. Some believe that people slip into another dimension, while others suspect a UFO crash might be to blame, as military personnel have allegedly been seen digging inside the caves. Native Americans were said to have avoided the area completely and referred to it as the shaman's portal. But so far, no conclusive explanation has ever been given for the bizarre events that are rumored to happen in the 520. Stories about a vampire lurking in Richmond, Virginia's Hollywood Cemetery have been around since the 1920s, but this nightcrawler isn't exactly of the Bela Lugosi variety. Rumored to dwell in one of the graveyard's hillside mausoleums, the so-called Richmond vampire may be related to a worker on the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad's Church Tunnel back in 1925, when it tragically caved in, burying several men alive. One of the workers, a fireman named Benjamin Mosby, reportedly managed to dig his way out, but had broken teeth and severe burn injuries that were so bad, eyewitnesses claimed his skin had fallen away in flaps, and he ultimately died at a nearby hospital. It's right about here where this grisly tale takes a sharp turn toward the strange. According to local lore, the Richmond vampire also emerged from the wreckage with broken teeth that looked like fangs and bloody skin hanging from his bones. He was supposedly chased by the rescue team and fled to the graveyard, where he scared off his pursuers by screaming curses at them. It's not exactly the kind of defensive move you'd expect from a blood-sucking creature of the night, which is why some Virginians believe it wasn't a vampire at all, but instead just an account of what really happened with Mosby after he escaped the tunnel. Considering that Mosby was buried in Hollywood Cemetery and the undead creature's description at least somewhat matches the accounts of Mosby's injuries, they may be onto something. Ohio is home to another classic monster tale. Turns out you don't have to go to London if you want to see a werewolf. Back in the summer of 1972, you could have just gone to Defiance, Ohio. Starting in late July of that year, police received multiple reports that there was a large beast resembling a werewolf on the loose. One witness, a local train crewman who supposedly spotted the creature with a coworker early one morning on the town's railroad tracks, claimed it had fangs and hairy feet, and that it ran from side to side like a caveman in movies. There were other early morning sightings too, including from a driver who said it ran in front of his car and then disappeared. Others even said they saw it holding a 2x4. The police actually took all of this seriously, but told the press they suspected it was just a person wearing a costume or a mask. The so-called creature was never found, and after that summer, it all but disappeared. Still, if you're in the area during the next full moon, you might want to think twice before taking a midnight stroll, just in case. If you're in Philly, a one-way ticket to nowhere could be easier to come by than you think. Legend has it that there's a bus in the city that doesn't have a destination or show up on any transit maps, but it appears when people are down on their luck and looking for a way out. You reportedly have to wave the bus down to make it stop, and you only have one chance to catch it, or else you'll never see it again. The ride can last for hours, days, months, or potentially even years, because once a passenger sits down, they're said to fall into a deep state of reflection and don't emerge from it until they've faced their demons and figured out how to fix their problems, at which point they just tug on the cord. Then the bus, which locals call Zero, drops them off exactly where they first got picked up. With any luck, their next destination is much happier. Speaking of cities, if you're heading up to Providence, Rhode Island, and you're feeling a little thirsty, you might be tempted to take a sip from the fountain outside the Providence Athenaeum, which is emblazoned with the message, "Come hither, everyone that thirsteth." But before you do, you might want to know about the little curse that's involved. You see, the nearly 200-year-old Athenaeum was once a favorite haunt for some famous writers, including Edgar Allan Poe, who spent time there when he visited the city back in 1848. But before he left, Poe allegedly put a hex on the fountain. According to legend, if you drink from it, you're either bound to return to the city or you'll never leave it again. The curse kind of varies depending on the source. One thing everyone can agree on, though, is that this story probably isn't true, given that the Gothic Revival-style fountain wasn't built until 1873, a full 24 years after Poe's death. Okay, so lately we've talked about werewolves and cursed fountains and a ghost town that was apparently pretty high up on Charlie Manson's dream vacations list. But you know what we haven't really talked about lately? Love. So to do that, we're going to head to Tennessee, because nothing screams love like an urban legend from the 1920s, involving a guy getting skinned alive for accidentally falling for another dude's wife. Am I right? According to the Skin Tom legend, after Tom got his skin peeled off at a local lover's lane by his girlfriend's angry husband, he turned into something considerably less romantic. Although some versions of this tale do vary, Police supposedly never found Tom's body, and it was only after following a trail of blood into the woods nearby that they found his skin hanging from a tree. Even though Skin Tom is said to be just a skeleton at this point, he supposedly haunts other lovers' lanes along the Tennessee and Kentucky border. And he carries a long hunting knife, just like the one that was used to take his flesh off. But before you get too spooked, you should know that he only goes after cheaters, and mostly people who have claimed to have seen him say he just stands around their cars and glares, like the ultimate creeper. Idaho's Payette Lake is said to be the home of the Nessie-like creature known as Charlie, but that urban legend is child's play compared to the water babies in Massacre Rocks near Pocatello, Idaho. According to legend, there was once a terrible famine in the area, and some members of local Native American tribes opted to drown their infants rather than let them starve. In the tamest version of the legend, you merely hear these babies crying and sitting in the water. But in others, those babies actually survived by growing gills. Supposedly, they still lure unsuspecting people to their deaths. We don't know exactly how many people died while working on the Hoover Dam. Some estimates put it at 112, while others say 96. We can, however, say with certainty how many people are buried in it. 0. Though it's claimed that there are corpses concealed within the concrete, no one is actually buried in the dam. Pouring the concrete was a precise, multi-person job, so it would have been impossible for someone to stuff a dead person into it without anyone noticing. But that hasn't stopped this urban legend from spreading all across the Silver State. Up until a few years ago, people in Augusta, Georgia had to beware of a 10-foot-tall pillar on 5th and Broad Street, said to be cursed. Legend has it after an evangelist was forbidden from preaching there, he threatened that a great wind would destroy the place except for one pillar, and that whoever tried to remove this remaining pillar would be struck dead. In the words of the yearbook of the City Council of Augusta, Georgia of 1977. Soon, a storm, or a tornado, reports vary, did just that. Supposedly, several attempts to remove the pillar ended with people dying in different ways. Eventually, it was said that anyone who so much as touched the pillar would be left as an end. The pillar got a taste of its own medicine in 2016, when it was destroyed by a vehicle collision for the third time. It hasn't been rebuilt, though apparently a stump, which locals are still wary of, remains. As the saying goes, everything is bigger in Texas, and the same is true for its urban legends. The Lone Star State has its fair share of myths you've probably heard of before, but La Lechuza is one that might have flown under the radar, and in more ways than one. La Lechuza, or the witch owl, comes from Mexican and Tejano folklore, and it's said to be a woman who can turn herself into a giant 7-foot-tall white owl with a 15-foot wingspan and glowing red eyes. The creature prowls the Rio Grande Valley at night. In some versions of the tale, she's a witch who is murdered by local villagers for practicing black magic. But in others, she's just a mom looking to avenge the death of a son. Some believe there can be more than one, and that the owls are real owls that have just been trained by witches to carry out their spells. According to most versions of the story, though, the La Lechuza can draw people in by sounding like a crying infant, and that's when it strikes. It's said to be powerful enough to snatch up grown men and carry them off into the night. If you want to survive, praying might help, or you could just stay inside your house until morning, because that's when the La Lechuza reverts back to its human form. Speaking of terrifying women, let's head down to John Denver's favorite state. The Mothman isn't the only urban legend you'll hear about around here. Screaming Jenny is another creepy one supposedly dating from the mid-1800s. According to the tale, a young woman with no family ended up squatting in an old storage shed along the Harpers Ferry Railroad depot. One cold autumn night, she lit a fire inside to warm up and ended up accidentally setting herself ablaze. Panicked and shrieking, she ran outside and headed straight for the railroad tracks, hoping that someone would see her and put out the flames. But because she was essentially a ball of fire at that point, she didn't notice there was a train coming right after her until it was too late. About a month after Jenny's untimely passing, another train operator passed through the area and claimed to see a giant ball of fire along the tracks. He also failed to stop the train in time, but when he got out, there was nothing there. No fire, and most importantly, no bodies either. Residents of Harpers Ferry to this day claim you can still spot Screaming Jenny on the anniversary of her death, engulfed by flames and desperately trying to find someone who will help her. Not all urban legends have to be doom and gloom. Take the ones surrounding Indiana's iconic car race, the Indy 500. According to one urban legend, a tourist driving through town got caught up in the race traffic and ended up in the race's infield. According to another, a rabbit on the track means good luck for the racers. If you are looking for a creepy urban legend, though, feel free to read up on the House of the Blue Lights, in which millionaire Skiles Edward Test was said to have kept his dead wife encased in a glass coffin surrounded by blue lights in his house. The only problem with that one? All 3 of Tess's wives outlived him. I don't know about you, but I'm ready for another scary ship tale. When the Carol A. Deary wrecked along the coast of the Outer Banks in the winter of 1921, the ship was mysteriously empty. No one knew what happened to its crew. People suspected a mutiny, or perhaps a crash with another ship. Then, that spring, a message discovered within a bottle stated that the crew had been captured by another boat, leading people to believe pirates were the cause. News then spread that Bolsheviks were to blame, and that the ship was caught up in their plot to steal ships and crews and smuggle them to Russia. That theory was later debunked, however, and the person who discovered the message in the bottle was revealed to have written it in an attempt to get a job at the Cape Hatteras lighthouse. To this day, no one really knows what happened to the people aboard the Carol A. Deary. But if you're thinking, that doesn't sound that urban legendy to me, let me just say 2 words. Bermuda Triangle. Yeah, there we go. Supposedly the ship passed over that area of the ocean. In March of 1985, a terrible accident occurred on a bridge just
Okay,
outside
none of
the
this is scaring
It was
me.
snowing when...
The special agent in charge, Henry Schneider, stood at the end of a dirt road that led to a hidden laboratory built like a cave on the side of a hill in a very secluded location in the country. His team was still inside the lab, doing one last sweep, making sure it was relatively safe, but making very little progress when it came to identifying their discoveries. Nobody understood what on earth had been going on in that strange place. They were from the FBI. They could break in and make arrests, but they couldn't understand that laboratory. That's what my team was here for. From what Henry Schneider told me, the mission hadn't been particularly difficult. The FBI had searched for that underground laboratory for months, but when they finally found a lead, the rest came almost too easily. Agent Schneider led the operation. He brought the best and largest team the FBI would grant him, and they broke into the lab by surprise. Or so they thought. When they got there, the place was a mess, and yet also oddly quiet. As if a tornado had passed just a second before Henry Schneider and his team effortlessly broke through the gates. The only problem was that the head scientist, Julian Beck, was nowhere to be seen. I was well acquainted with Julian's work. We used to be colleagues and we worked in the same field, a special group focused on medicine, microbiology, and the search for cures for certain illnesses that affected humanity. I was also aware of Julian's stained reputation and his disappearance from the academic world, but I didn't know he was a criminal. Apparently, the FBI had been searching for Julian Beck for years. The stealthy and enigmatic doctor, if he could even be called that, had all his degrees revoked, lost all his money, privileges, reputation, and even his dignity after being found guilty of several charges of unethical medical practices, including criminal human experimentation. He disappeared before they could put him behind bars. The handful of sketchy scientists the FBI found and arrested at the scene of the crime wasn't of any help to find Julian Beck. They were an intriguing group, formed of retired experts in several areas of physics, some of them with reputations as bad as Julian's. None of them had said a word about their boss's whereabouts, or about anything, really. Someone informed us that the eccentrics in handcuffs displayed significant signs of profound shock, and would probably need time before they revealed any significant information to the FBI agents. Unfortunately for everyone involved, we didn't have time to sit around and wait. That's the reason Henry found me and my team. He needed answers, and he needed them immediately. The previous day, a black SUV showed up in front of my house, and Henry Schneider introduced himself as special agent in charge from the FBI, dealing with a highly sensitive and urgent mission that required the expertise of the best scientists in the country, knowledgeable in areas of biology, physics, and the history of Julian Beck. A quick trip to pick up my colleague Natasha Robinson, half a dozen more scientists, a short flight to the middle of nowhere, and another long drive in a similar black car. And we made it to the infamous laboratory built like a cave on a hill.
Doctor.
Henry called me.
If you and your team could follow me now, please.
We trailed after the special agent, like lambs to the slaughter. A large vehicle filled with FBI agents drove away from the scene. We were left alone with Henry and 3 agents guarding the door. The scandalous laboratory was all ours. If anything, it was worse than any of us imagined. "What the hell?" I whispered, looking all around me. 6 other scientists behind me muttered similar signs of shock.
Why does it look abandoned?
Natasha wondered. She was my right-hand woman, and I trusted her with my life.
I thought you only busted this place like a few days ago.
It happened yesterday.
Henry said matter-of-factly.
The filth, dust, and cobwebs were here when we arrived. We guess everyone was obsessively focused on their work to care about hygiene. All the arrested scientists have shown signs of malnourishment, infections, and other diseases.
Yet them working under conditions of slavery.
Natasha pointed out, flinching away from a workstation that, apparently, had also been used as a bathroom.
Huh. It gets worse,
Henry said. It really was a rudimentary cave. Dark, rough,
looks like
a high ceiling. Wires and cables were tangled all around with zero regard for safety. 2 lines of computers and diverse equipment were set along the walls. But nothing captured our attention quite like the bewildering mechanism standing proudly near the end of the cave. 4 large metal arms stretched from the walls like a system you'd find in any automobile factory. A few steps led to an awkward and empty podium at the center. But what really stood out was the final arm of the structure. A thick branch that descended from the ceiling like an appendage that ended on an open gate right above the pedestal. I think the special agent was talking about something, but I couldn't hear him. I didn't care. I just blurted out the words. "It's a portal."
"What?"
Henry snapped at me. "It's a portal. Julian built a portal," I exclaimed, running forward to take a closer look at the ominous structure at the center of the cave.
What kind of portal?
Natasha wondered, following close behind. Well, modern science has only gotten as far as rudimentary teleportation, just a couple of miles maximum, but the structure is similar and yet wildly unique. This could be anything, I replied. There was a tense silence all over the cave. Then, the rest of the scientists started to excitedly talk among themselves. Their excitement was contagious.
Well, that was faster than I imagined.
The special agent told me, seemingly satisfied.
I'm going to need more information, though. How do we get it?
We'll get it, I assured him. You said you cut off the energy of the lab, right? Turn it on again. I'll set my team on the workstations here. We'll do whatever it takes to see what this was meant to do.
How
Henry
are
nodded
ya?
firmly, and then whistled at the agent still stationed at the gates of the lab. He made a sign.
Doing
and
spooky
instructed them to turn the
stories
power back
for October.
It'll take a minute,
so.
Henry said.
In the meantime, I need you to see something else. Miss, perhaps you should stay here. It's rather unpleasant.
I can take it.
Natasha said with a small frown.
As you wish.
Following Henry's words, we went after him to one side of the cave. We hadn't noticed it until then, but there was an iron grilled door leading to a hallway seemingly excavated on the wall of the cave. The special agent opened the door and led us inside. It was much
mining
darker,
on
with just
the
one
planet
lone
of
yellow bulb
Mars.
in the middle of the hallway. The smell was strange, definitely much
We got a
worse
small,
than back in the
small
main
mining
area,
rover and a large
but I would have
mining
never
rover.
guessed what we found. Henry nodded to his right, and there we found 3 cells. Dark, filthy, probably less than 5 feet square each, and inside...
What the fuck?
Natasha yelled. Agent... Henry, what are we looking at? I wondered, outraged, and instinctively looked away, because it was a horrifying thing to look at.
I was hoping you would tell me, Doc.
Henry said to me.
This is insane.
Natasha exclaimed.
This is a textbook image of a Homo erectus. Are you sure this isn't prosthetics or makeup?
It's human devolution, I said. Natasha and Henry looked at me, equal parts confused and mortified. I've only heard it mentioned a few times before. It was Julian Beck's dream experiment, but I never got to see any real results. Until now, I suppose. It's regression. It's a purposeful reversion of natural evolution to recreate ancient states of being.
Why the fuck would anyone want to do that?
Henry wondered. I shrugged and thought for a minute, searching for the right words. I studied the specimen in front of me. He looked almost like a man. Standing tall, leaning against the corner of his cell.
He looked like a
heavily.
man.
His body was almost entirely covered in hair. He had big shoulders, strong legs, and a skull noticeably different from ours. But as I looked into his eyes, full of primal fear, I couldn't help but think about how he wasn't always like this. He used to be a man like any other, and now he was something else. He was a creature. What the hell did you do, Julian Beck? After clearing my throat, I tried to explain. Well, Julian believed that with human devolution, he could cure almost any illness that modern humans suffered. He said he'd be able to cure cancer.
This doesn't seem worth it.
Natasha sighed.
We call him the caveman.
Henry told us, and I was annoyed at the way he sounded almost amused at the nickname. Why didn't you take him with the other arrested scientists? I asked him, but he didn't answer me, which I thought was kind of fair. I wouldn't have known how to present this to the government either.
The caveman isn't the worst one, Doc.
Henry told me. Just then, I took another step down the hallway and joined Natasha in front of the other cell. She looked like she was about to be sick.
I told you.
Henry sighed.
I'm fine.
Natasha answered with a groan. She gagged when she looked at the thing in front of her and then added.
I need to know. Doctor, what the hell is this?
I couldn't speak at first. This specimen was much different. It was a poor, frail little thing, curled up in a fetal position on one side of the cell. First, I thought it could be a fetus, the size of a teenage boy. Then I thought it was an elderly man suffering from an unspeakable disease. But nothing made sense. It was human, or it used to be. The limbs were so slim. The skin was a sickly gray color, and it was all covered in thin black hairs. But the real shock was the marks covering the body. Narrow lines raised all over his skin like ducts, like tubes encrusted under the skin, like veins. Those were his veins, protruding from the surface of the skin. The first specimen was still breathing raggedly, groaning, but this one was making pitiful sounds. This one was whining. It was crying. This isn't just human devolution, I finally said. This is something different, something much worse. This isn't part of our natural evolution. Julian Beck must have manipulated the process to create this. He took the humanity from these people and made something entirely his own. My colleague Natasha was on the verge of tears. She looked furious.
Julian Beck, you repugnant son of a bitch. What did you do?
She said. The next hint at the true depth of Julian's work didn't wait for us to find it. Natasha was crouched in front of the second cell, but very suddenly I heard her screaming, and I watched her fall backward. From the third cell, a hand burst out from between the bars and reached for her. The gray, skinny, gross limb flailed around restlessly. We finally took one look at the final cell. Natasha's scream reverberated in that cave, and I felt matching terror in my chest. Forget the image of cavemen. Forget sick bodies and everything we thought we were capable of doing to human bodies. There was barely anything resembling a person left in this case. The body had melted and molded along the floor of the cave. The bones and gristle protruded from the dirty ground. One hand squirmed like a worm along the edge of the cell, while the other, the last remaining moving limb, tried to grab Natasha's ankle. The disgusting, shapeless lump on the ground was crowned by a face. Not even a head. Just a vague resemblance of a human visage. Empty eye sockets, bones so prominent there was barely any skin covering them, and a gaping maw currently wailing like a mortally wounded animal. I was backed against the wall, holding my head between my hands, struggling between nausea and the urge to cry like an infant. I recovered just enough to help Natasha stand back up. Agent Schneider, take us out of here, I said, and turned toward the man that looked as somber and disturbed as I felt. This place ought to be burned down and erased from our history. If you find Julian Beck, you should shoot him in the head. This cursed place is a piece of hell on earth. That's all the professional answers I can give you. Now, please, get us the hell out of here. The agent nodded, but I didn't even wait for him. I started walking toward the end of the hallway. My legs were trembling, and I had to support myself with Natasha's help. She seemed grateful for the human contact, and held me just as tightly. We had just survived a nightmare, and we were more than eager to leave that abominable place forever. This should have been the end of it. But then we returned to the main area of the laboratory. It seemed Henry's team had successfully turned the power back on. The lights above us were flickering, and the computers and machines were rumbling back to life. But the most concerning thing was the giant structure beside us. The 4 mechanical arms were starting to move, twisting and turning like real limbs, and the pedestal at the bottom was beginning to glow. I heard Natasha ask me something, and I noticed Henry barking orders as he stood next to us, but I couldn't focus on them. I remembered some of Henry's first words to me. They didn't find Julian Beck. The laboratory was a mess. The workers exhibited signs of shock. I looked up at the ceiling of the lab. I looked at the ground below us, and there were semicircles marked discreetly around us. When I looked up at my fellow scientist and noticed their stunned and worried faces, I wondered if that was also the last thing that Julian Beck saw. "We have to get out of here," I said, but it was already too late. A blinding light came out from behind us. We winced, we clutched each other, and we couldn't see anything, but when we tried to move away from the portal, we found that our bodies felt weightless and powerless. One step forward dragged us 5 feet backward. The floor disappeared beneath our feet. There was nothing solid around us but each other, and then, finally, mercifully, we crashed back down onto the ground. Before I even opened my eyes, all my other senses were overwhelmed. There was a painful pressure on my shoulders where Henry's heavy boot was pressing against me, and my legs were going numb because Natasha was lying on top of them. I was cold, despite the lack of breeze around me. It was just the kind of cold you feel deep within your bones. The ground below me was rough and uneven, but somewhat yielding, making me think of stepping around a marsh. But what really brought me back to my senses was that goddamned awful smell. It brought me back to my medical studies, to anatomy classes, and the lingering smell of formaldehyde, and the memory of dissected bodies. But much worse. Sharper, as if the formaldehyde wasn't quite enough to disguise the scent of death and stop the decomposition of the flesh and organs. I pushed myself to a seated position and realized the special agent was already up and alert, studying our surroundings. Natasha was waking up and immediately throwing up somewhere near my feet. I couldn't blame her. If the smell wasn't bad enough, then the disturbing space around us was enough to make any person gag.
Fucking hell.
Henry sighed when he realized we were awake and listening.
This is revolting. Doc, please, help me understand what this is.
I was shocked to hear his voice tremble. This man was from the FBI. He said he was a veteran. He was prepared for the worst that humanity could throw at him. And our current location was almost enough to bring him to tears.
Doc, please tell me we are... These can't be human bodies, right?
Natasha whispered, trying to stop her own tears. I couldn't lie to them. I took one more look around us. The dimension of the space was similar to the cave we had unwillingly left, but there was no ending in sight, and no ceiling above us. The walls stretched probably more than 100 feet above us, and at the top, there was a nearly homogeneous gray smoke. It floated, moved slowly, and allowed a dim light to fall over everything below. I placed the palm of my hand on the ground below us, feeling the slick and spongy texture, but more surprisingly, feeling it press against me, too. There were thin lines all around us, and I recognized at once the veins from the terrible specimens we'd found back in the cave. And the greatest shock was feeling a heartbeat pulsating against my hand. As if that wasn't enough to confirm Natasha's theory, one look up at the walls around us was enough to spot the first face. Just like the one we saw on the floor of the cave. Empty eye sockets. A perpetual expression of despair. Jutting bones. A yawning mouth. And, in this case, it still had a row of sharp, yellow teeth inside. There were countless faces like that one. They showed up at random intervals in the walls, on the floor, contorted awkwardly in the corners, watching us, moaning softly, connected by endless veins and beating like one single heart.
I don't care what this is made of,
Henry said.
We'll blow this all up anyway. I just want to find the exit.
He stood up on trembling legs, but quickly worked on regaining his composure. He prepared one of his guns and offered me the other. I declined. I couldn't shake off the idea that we were surrounded by creatures that used to be human. Henry passed the gun to Natasha, and she accepted it, looking horrified, also standing taller. She said,
We can't be far from the cave. This is probably teleportation. We're probably just a few meters away from the primary location. He kept that thick wall of solid rock to have this secret, perfectly safe hideout. Right?
I let them discuss that theory for a moment. I thought it was best not to share yet my theory that we were put through a portal that led to a man-made dimension, built on human bodies, manipulated through human devolution, and molded to fit Julian Beck's hellish dream. But there was something I couldn't hold back. There's no exit.
Inventory.
I snapped at them. There's no visible portal here, no structure or machinery for it. If there's an exit, and there has to be one, only one person can tell us about it. You know this is where he escaped to when he heard the FBI approaching. You know this will be your only chance to arrest Julian Beck. Natasha looked devastated. She was shaking her head almost imperceptibly. She knew me like no one else. She was disappointed in my choice. Back in the cave, I had chosen to run away, refused to see more of a sick man's torture of innocent bodies. This was way too much. I needed to find Julian Beck, look him in the eye, and then... Well, I wasn't quite sure yet, but I knew I needed to follow my instinct and to get to the bottom of this grotesque mystery. The special agent cleared his throat and addressed us, saying,
Very well. Let's go then. I'll lead. Doc, you'll be in the middle. Miss Robinson, I trust you to watch our backs. I'm going to need you both to keep your eyes peeled and don't trust absolutely anything around here except each other. Do not hesitate to shoot. Don't try to be humanitarian and don't investigate more than you should. Understood?
Our nods and silence were enough for him. He started marching forward, trusting that we would do the right thing and follow him. We tried, but...
What the fuck?
Henry screamed. There was a moment of confusion. He stopped walking, and Natasha screamed too. I looked around us for the source of his distress, and then I saw it. A gray and decaying hand burst up from the soggy ground and grabbed his ankle. Henry struggled against it and tried to yank his leg away, but that bony, decayed, dead limb was much stronger than it looked. It was rotten remnants of a perverted experiment, but it was connected to an immense structure that gave it incredible strength. I could feel my heart beating faster and Natasha clutching my arm tightly. We feared the worst, and then, in an instant, Henry shot at the attacker. There was a moment of silence while the wrist exploded into pieces. The fingers gripping Henry's ankle dropped lifelessly to the ground, and the veins and skin lingering at the end writhed on the ground like worms until they were swallowed into the mud. Then we heard a strange sound. A pained whine coming from underneath our feet. But it grew louder and louder. An anguished moan came at us from the floor. The walls, from deep within this strange, living, horrible cave. It's all connected, I told my companions.
Just walk carefully,
Henry warned us. Just like that, we started our journey. None of us dared to mention that Henry was limping a little. It felt wrong to walk away from the point where we arrived, but there was just a solid wall behind us and no way to open the portal again. I quickly rejected Natasha's theory that we were just deeper under the hill, just in a different cave. This place seemed endless. It wasn't a linear cave. It twisted and turned and often led us sharply left or right. It gave the impression of being a downhill path, and I tried not to think that we were descending into a very real and carefully planned hell. But our surroundings didn't help. There were eyes watching us from every angle. Some of the faces barely resembled something that used to be human. Some of them still had eyeballs on them, though they were blank and unseeing, yet gave the impression of following our every move. Usually, the mouths were opened, and we could hear them crying, mumbling incoherently. And a couple of times we came across one of those faces encrusted on a wall that had a thick, black liquid oozing from its mouth, trickling down the wall, forming a revolting puddle on the ground that we knew it was best to avoid. I couldn't help but wonder where they came from. If they were ever human. If Julian transformed them in this dimension. If he had been grave robbing fresh corpses to bring here. If he kidnapped innocents in the real world. If there was a chance these people willingly offered their lives and bodies to be profaned and used for a despicable man's benefit. I was so focused on my thoughts that I missed Henry whispering an order. He had to grab my arm to keep me from taking another step forward. That's when we realized we weren't alone. It wasn't just the remains of faces and limbs dangling from the walls. Just as we had seen different specimens back in the laboratory, there were some of them there with us, too. About 30 feet away from us, there was some movement. There was a creature crawling along the floor. It was like the second specimen we found. Gray, hairy, with protruding veins and skin sticking to its bones. It was made up of the same as everything around us, and its skin was so rotten it seemed that with every move it had to detach itself from the sloppy ground that tried to absorb it. In the silence, I could hear the nauseating squelch of the skin hitting the ground. The poor thing moved toward us slowly, on its hands and knees. Henry pointed his gun at it and signaled us to stay quiet and still as he decided what to do. But he didn't have time to think any longer. The choice came running at us from around a corner. It was something like the caveman we encountered previously. It was almost a man, full of hair, burly, fast, and growling angry as his white eyes focused on us. Henry didn't hesitate. He shot that creature right in the head, and then he shot the small and sick one too, just in case. The piece lasted only a second before two more cavemen appeared from around the corner. Henry continued shooting, but more and more of them started showing up. All of them were in diverse states of decaying, endless examples of human devolution.
Thank you for the biddies, Looney.
Bodies, veins covering them like vines,
And the
gray
sound
skin
alert.
sagging from their bones, empty eye sockets. They were all dead in one way or another. Running or crawling or stumbling, they were all coming at us. Henry couldn't deal with them alone.
Natasha fumbled with her gun, and at the first shot, she cried out at the recoil, but she kept going. She didn't have Henry's aim and couldn't kill them at once, hitting their heads, but she was of great help. I didn't know what to do. Henry stopped to reload his gun, but I knew we couldn't fight for long. I had to do something. Julian, I know you can hear me, Julian. Stop this. Stop this right now. Let us see you. Where are you, Julian Beck? It took a moment, but then it started to feel like the world was ending right in front of us. The ground started to shake, and the creatures coming at us stopped moving, and then started crumbling. Just their bones breaking, their skin falling off, eyeballs rolling over. The few organs left deflated and melted, and everything turned into a big, rotten pile of flesh and decay in the middle of the path. One man stood behind his morbid creation. He looked half dead already, almost like any other of his monsters. He was all bones and thin, translucent skin. He was trembling on his feet, and barely holding in his hand an electronic device with dozens of cables connected to his body. Was it worth it? I demanded. Was any of this worth it, Julian? You corrupted science for yourself alone, Julian. It wasn't meant to be like this. We were supposed to strive for progress. Not this. This isn't healing. You have enslaved human corpses. You've built a world of nothing but death and endless pain.
Julian Beck, you're under arrest and you're coming with us,
Henry said, steadily aiming his gun at Julian. It was a threat, obviously, but I could tell it was also his way to look for the exit. Julian shook his head slowly, and even then the movement made it look as if his frail skull would fall off his head.
Get out of my world before it's too late.
His voice was rough and shaky. He sounded like an elderly man on his deathbed, even though he couldn't have been more than 60. His process of devolution had started, and yet he was a god in this wretched dimension he created. But I was more struck by his words. Before it's too late. I turned to look at Henry and Natasha, and I almost screamed at what I saw. Henry's hair, which had been neatly short and gray at the temples at the start of the day, was now pitch black and much longer than before. In contrast, Natasha's youthful face now showed laughter lines and wrinkles at the corner of her eyes. I looked at my own hands and almost started crying when I noticed my veins were just slightly more noticeable than before. We were experiencing the beginning of the devolution process just by spending too much time in that horrid place. For better or for worse, Julian raised one trembling finger to the device on his hand, and without any sort of warning, a new blinding light shocked the three of us. No, I thought we couldn't leave just like that. We couldn't let Julian get away. But we couldn't fight it. The weightlessness, the light, the disorientation, and then the awkward fall on the firm and familiar ground of the laboratory. Scientists and agents of the FBI rushed toward us, looking at us with worry and shock. Henry's ankle was hurt and infected. Natasha was throwing up again. Our clothes were dirty and stained with rotten flesh. But all I could think about was destroying the entire cave. and making sure that Julian Beck never returned to our world. Hey, sci-fi horror fans, it's Thomas. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this story,
You fool! The dweller in the gulf. Swelling and towering swiftly, like a genie loosed from one of Solomon's bottles, the cloud rose on the planet's rim. A rusty and colossal column, it strode above the dead plain, through a sky that was dark as the brine of desert seas that have ebbed down to desert pools. "Looks like a blithering sandstorm," commented Maspic. "It can't very well be anything else," agreed Bellman rather curtly. "Any other kind of storm is unheard of in these regions. It's the sort of hell twister that the A-High call the Zorth, and it's coming our way, too. I move that we start looking for shelter. I've been caught in the Zorth before, and I don't recommend a lungful of that ferruginous dust." "There's a cave in the old riverbank, to the right," said Chivers, the third member of the party, who had been searching the desert with restless, falcon-like eyes. The trio of Earthmen, hard-bitten adventurers who disdain the services of Martian guides, had started 5 days before from the outpost of Ahum into the uninhabited region called the Chor. Here, in the beds of great rivers that had not flowed for cycles, it was rumored that the pale, platinum-like gold of Mars could be found lying in heaps, like so much salt. If fortune were propitious, their years of somewhat unwilling exile on the Red Planet would soon be at an end. They had been warned against the Chore, and had heard some queer tales in Ahum regarding the reasons why former prospectors had not returned. But danger, no matter how dire or exotic, was merely a part of their daily routine. With a fair chance of unlimited gold at the journey's end, they would have gone down through Hinnom. Their food supplies and water barrels were carried on the backs of 3 of those curious mammals called vortlups, which, with their elongated legs and necks and horny plated bodies, might seemingly have been some fabulous combination of llama and saurian. These animals, though extravagantly ugly, were tame and obedient, and were well adapted to desert travel, being able to go without water for months at a time. For the past 2 days, they had followed the mile-wide course of a nameless ancient river, winding among hills that had dwindled to mere hummocks through eons of exfoliation. They had found nothing but worn boulders, pebbles, and fine, rusty sand. Heretofore the sky had been silent and stirless, and nothing moved on the river bottom, whose stones were bare even of dead lichen. The malignant column of the Zorth, twisting and swelling toward them, was the first sign of animation they had discerned in that life. Prodding their vortlups with the iron-pointed goads, which alone could elicit any increase of speed from these sluggish monsters, the Earthmen started off toward the cavern mouth described by Chivers. It was perhaps 1/3 of a mile distant, and was high up in the shelving shore. The Zorth had blotted out the sun ere they reached the bottom of the ancient slope, and they moved through a sinister twilight that was colored like dried blood. The vortlups, protesting with unearthly bellows, began to climb the beach, which was marked off in a series of more or less regular steps that indicated the slow recession of its olden waters. The column of sand, rising and whirling formidably, had reached the opposite bank when they came to the cavern. This cavern was in the face of a low cliff of iron-veined rock. The entrance had crumbled down in heaps of ferro-oxide and dark basaltic dust, but was large enough to admit with ease the Earthmen and their laden beasts of burden. Darkness, heavy, as if with a weaving of black webs, clogged the interior. They could form no idea of the cave's dimensions till Bellman got out an electric torch from his bale of belongings and turned its prying beam into the shadows. The torch served merely to reveal the beginnings of a chamber of indeterminate size that ran backward into night, widening gradually, with a floor that was worn smooth as if by vanished waters. The opening had grown dark with the onset of the Zorth. A weird moaning, as of baffled demons, filled the ears of the explorers, and particles of atom-like sand were blown in upon them, stinging their hands and faces like powdered adamant. "The storm will last for half an hour at least," said Bellman. "Shall we go on into the cave? Probably we won't find anything of much interest or value, but the exploration will serve to kill time, and we might happen on a few violet rubies or amber-yellow sapphires, such as are sometimes discovered in these desert caverns. You two had better bring along your torches also, and flash them on the walls and ground as we go." His companions thought the suggestion worth following. The Vortlaps, wholly insensible to the blowing sand in their scaly mail, were left behind near the entrance. Chivers, Bellman, and Maspic, with their torch beams tearing a clotted gloom that had perhaps never known the intrusion of light in all its former cycles, went on into the widening cave. The place was bare, with the death-like emptiness of some long-deserted catacomb. Its rusted floor and walls returned no gleam or sparkle to the playing lights. It sloped downward at an easy gradient, and the sides were watermarked at a height of 6 or 7 feet. No doubt it had been, in earlier eons, the channel of an underground offshoot from the river. It had been swept clean of all detritus, and was like the interior of some cyclopean conduit that might give upon a sub-Martian Erebus. None of the three adventurers was overly imaginative or prone to nervousness, but all were beset by certain odd impressions. Behind the arrows of cryptic silence, time and again they seemed to hear a faint whisper, like the sigh of sunken seas, far down at some hemispheric depth. The air was tinged with a slight and doubtful dankness, and they felt the stirring of an almost imperceptible draught upon their faces. Oddest of all was the hint of a nameless odor, reminding them both of animal dens and the peculiar smell of Martian dwellings. "Do you suppose we'll encounter any kind of life?" said Maspic, sniffing the air dubiously. "Not likely." Bellman dismissed the query with his usual curtness. "Even the wild Vortlaps avoid the chore." "But there's certainly a touch of dampness in the air," persisted Maspic. "That means water somewhere, and if there's water, there may be life also, perhaps of a dangerous kind." "We've got our revolvers," said Bellman, "but I doubt if we'll need them, as long as we don't meet any rival gold hunters from the Earth," he added cynically. "Listen." The semi-whisper came from Chivers. "Do you fellows hear anything?" All three had paused. Somewhere in the gloom ahead, they heard a prolonged, equivocal noise that baffled the ear with incongruous elements. It was a sharp rustling and rattling as of metal dragged over rock, and also it was somehow like the smacking of myriad wet, enormous mouths. Anon it receded and died out at a level that was seemingly far below. "That's queer." Bellman seemed to make a reluctant admission. "What is it?" queried Chivers. "One of the millipetal underground monsters, half a mile long, that the Martians tell about?" "You've been hearing too many native fairy tales," reproved Bellman. "No terrestrial has ever seen anything of that kind. Many deep-lying caverns on Mars have been thoroughly explored, but those in desert regions, such as the Chore, were devoid of life. I can't imagine what could have made that noise, but in the interest of science, I'd like to go on and find out." "I'm beginning to feel creepy," said Maspic, "but I'm game if you others are." Without further argument or comment, the three continued their advance into the cave. They had been walking at a fair gait for 15 minutes, and were now at least half a mile from the entrance. The floor was steepening, as if it had been the bed of a torrent. Also, the conformation of the walls had changed. On either hand, there were high shelves of metallic stone, and columnated recesses which the flash rays of the torches could not always fathom. The air had grown heavier, the dampness unmistakable. There was a breath of stagnant, ancient waters. That other smell, as of wild beasts and high dwellings, also tainted the gloom with its clinging fetor. Bellman was leading the way. Suddenly his torch revealed the verge of a precipice, where the Olden Channel ended sheerly, and the shelves and walls pitched away on each side into incalculable space. Going to the very edge, he dipped his pencil of light down the abyss, disclosing only the vertical cliff that fell at his feet into darkness, with no apparent bottom. The beam also failed to reach the further shore of the gulf, which might have been many leagues in extent. "Looks as if we had found the original jumping-off place," observed Chivers. Looking about, he secured a loose lump of rock the size of a small boulder, which he hurled as far out as he could into the abysm. The Earthmen listened for the sound of its fall, but several minutes went by, and there was no echo from the black profound. Bellman started to examine the broken-off ledges on either side of the channel's terminus. To the right he discerned a downward-sloping shelf that skirted the abyss, running for an uncertain distance. Its beginning was little higher than the channel feed, and was readily accessible by means of a stair-like formation. The shelf was 2 yards wide, and its gentle inclination, its remarkable evenness and regularity, conveyed the idea of an ancient road hewn in the face of the cliff. It was overhung by the wall, as if by the sharply sundered half of a high arcade. "There's our road to Hades," said Bellman, "and the downgrade is easy enough at that." "What's the use of going further?" said Maspic. "I, for one, have had enough darkness already, and if we were to find anything by going on, it would be valueless or unpleasant." Bellman hesitated. "Maybe you're right, but I'd like to follow that ledge far enough to get some idea of the magnitude of the gulf. You and Chivers can wait here if you're afraid." Chivers and Maspic, apparently, were unwilling to avow whatever trepidation they might have felt. They followed Bellman along the shelf, hugging the inner wall. Bellman, however, strode carelessly on the verge, often flashing his torch into the vastitude that engulfed its feeble beam. More and more, through its uniform breadth, inclination, and smoothness, and the demi-arch of cliff above, the shelf impressed the Earthmen as being an artificial road. But who could have made and used it? In what forgotten ages and for what enigmatic purpose had it been designed? The imagination of the terrestrials failed before the stupendous gulfs of Martian antiquity that yawned in such tenebrous queries. Bellman thought that the wall curved inward upon itself by slow degrees. No doubt they would round the entire abyss in time by following the road. Perhaps it wound in a slow, tremendous spiral.
Sir Butt kicked your ass.
To the very bowels of Mars.
Scaly mastermind.
Lengthening intervals of silence. They were horribly startled when, as they went on, they heard in the depths beneath the same peculiar long-drawn sound or combination of sounds which they had heard in the outer cavern. It suggested other images now. The rustling was a file-like scraping. The soft, methodical myriad smacking was vaguely similar to the noise made by some enormous creature that withdraws its feet from a quagmire. The sound was inexplicable, terrifying. Part of its terror lay in an implication of remoteness, which appeared to signalize the enormity of its cause and to emphasize the profundity of the abysm. Heard in that planetary pit beneath a lifeless desert, it astonished and shocked. Even Bellman, intrepid heretofore, began to succumb to the formless horror that rose up like an emanation from the night. The noise grew fainter, and ceased at length, giving somehow the idea that its maker had gone directly down on the perpendicular wall into nether reaches of the gulf. "Shall we go back?" inquired Chivers. "We might as well," assented Bellman without demur. "It would take all eternity to explore this place anyway." They started to retrace their way along the ledge, all three with that extra tactile sense which warns of the approach of hidden danger, were now troubled and alert. Though the gulf had grown silent once more with that withdrawal of the strange noise, they somehow felt that they were not alone. Whence the peril would come, or in what shape, they could not surmise, but they felt an alarm that was almost panic. Tacitly, none of them mentioned it, nor did they discuss the eerie mystery on which they had stumbled in a manner so fortuitous. Maspic was a little ahead of the others now. They had covered at least half of the distance to the old cavern channel, when his torch, playing for 20 feet ahead on the path, illumined an array of whitish figures, 3 abreast, that blocked the way. The flashlights of Bellman and Chivers, coming close behind, brought out with hideous clearness the vanward limbs and faces of the throng. You could not determine its number. The creatures, who stood perfectly motionless and silent, as if awaiting the Earthmen, were generically similar to the Ahai or Martian natives. They seemed, however, to represent an extremely degraded and aberrant type, and the fungus-like pallor of their bodies denoted many ages of underground life. They were smaller, too, than full-grown Ahai, being on the average about 5 feet tall. They possessed the enormous open nostrils, the flaring ears, the barrel chests and lanky limbs of the Martians, but all of them were eyeless. In the faces of some, there were faint, rudimentary slits where the eyes should have been. In the faces of others, there were deep and empty orbits that suggested a removal of the eyeballs. "Lord, what a ghastly crew!" cried Maspic. "Where do they come from? And what do they want?" "Can't imagine," said Bellman. "The situation is somewhat ticklish, unless they are friendly. They must have been hiding on the shelves in the cavern above when we entered." Stepping boldly
Right,
forward,
open fire.
Maspic, he addressed the creatures in the guttural Ahai tongue, many of whose vocables are scarcely to be articulated by us. Some of the people stirred uneasily and emitted shrill, peeping sounds that bore little likeness to the Martian language. It was plain that they could not understand Bellman. Sign language, by reason of their blindness, would have been equally useless. Bellman drew his revolver, enjoining the others to follow suit. "We've got to get through them somehow," he said, "and if they won't let us pass without interference..." The click of a cocked hammer served to finish the sentence. As if the metallic sound had been an awaited signal, the press of blind white beings sprang into sudden motion and surged forward upon the terrestrials. It was like the onset of automatons, an irresistible striding of machines, concerted and methodical beneath the direction of a hidden power. Bellman pulled his trigger, once, twice, thrice, at a point-blank range. It was impossible to miss, but the bullets were futile as pebbles flung at the spate of an onrushing torrent.
Blood.
The eyeless beings did not waver, though 2 of them began to bleed the yellowish-red fluid that serves the Martians for blood. The foremost of them, unwounded and moving
Well,
with
you'll have to
diabolical
see it in your
caught
imagination.
Bellman's arm with long, 4-jointed fingers and jerked the revolver from his grasp before he could press the trigger again. Curiously enough, the creature did not try to deprive him of his torch, which he now carried in his left hand, and he saw the steely flash of the Colt as it hurtled down into darkness and space from the hand of the Martian. Then the fungus-white bodies, milling horribly on the narrow road, were all about him, pressing so closely that there was no room for effectual resistance. Chivers and Maspic, after firing a few shots, were also deprived of their weapons, but, through an uncanny discrimination, were permitted to retain their flashlights. The entire episode had been a matter of moments. There was only a brief slackening of the onward motion of the throng, 2 of whose members had been shot down by Chivers and Maspic. and then hurled expeditiously into the gulf by their fellows. The foremost ranks, opening deftly, included the Earthmen, and forced them to turn backward. Then, tightly caught in a moving vice of bodies, they were borne resistlessly along. Handicapped by the fear of dropping their torches, they could do nothing against the nightmare torrent, rushing with dreadful strides on a path that led ever deeper into the abyss, and able to see only the lit backs and members of the creatures before them. They became a part of that eyeless and cryptic army. Behind them, there seemed to be scores of the Martians, driving them on implacably. After a while, their plight began to paralyze their faculties. It seemed that they moved no longer with human steps, but with the swift and automatic stalking of the clammy things that pressed about them. Thought, volition, even terror were numbed by the unearthly rhythm of those abyssward beating feet. Constrained by this, by a sense of utter unreality, they spoke
Now I'm out tearing up his backyard.
monosyllables that appeared to have lost all proper meaning, like the speech of machines. The blind people were wholly silent. There was no sound, except that of a myriad eternal padding on the sky. On they went, through ebon hours that belonged to no diurnal period. Slowly, tortuously.
Thank you for the biddies.
As if it were
Appreciate it.
about the interior of a blind and cosmic Babel. The Earthmen felt that they must have circled the abyss many times in that terrific spiral. The distance they had gone, and the actual extent of the stupefying gulf, were inconceivable. Except for their torches, the night was absolute, unchangeable. It was older than the sun. It had brooded there through all past eons. It accumulated above them like a monstrous burden. It yawned frightfully beneath. From it, the strengthening stench of stagnant waters rose. But still there was no sound other than the soft and measured thud of marching feet that descended into a bottomless abaddon. Somewhere, as if after the lapse of nocturnal ages, the pitward rushing had ceased. Bellman, Chivers, and Maspic felt the pressure of crowded bodies relax, felt that they were standing still, while their brains continued to beat the unhuman measure of that terrible descent. Reason and horror returned to them slowly. Bellman lifted his flashlight, and the circling ray recovered the throng of Martians, many of whom were dispersing in a huge cavern where the gulf-circling road had now ended. Others of the beings remained, however, as if to keep guard over the Earthmen. They quivered alertly at Bellman's movements, as if aware of them through an unknown sense. Close at hand, on the right, the level floor ended abruptly. Stepping to the verge, Bellman saw that the cavern was an open chamber in the perpendicular wall. Far, far below in the blackness, a phosphorescent glimmer played to and fro, like Noctiluki on an underworld ocean. The slow, fetid wind blew upon him, and he heard the weird sighing of waters about the sunken cliffs, waters that had ebbed through untold cycles during the planet's desiccation. He turned giddily away. His companions were examining the cave's interior. It seemed that the place was of artificial origin, for, darting here and there, the torch beams brought out enormous columnations lined with deeply graven bas-reliefs. Who had carved them, or when, were problems no less insoluble than the origin of the cliff-hewn road. Their details were obscene as the visions of madness. They shook the eye like a violent blow, conveying an extra-human evil, a bottomless malignity, in the passing moment of disclosure. The cave was indeed of stupendous extent, running far back in the cliff, and with numerous exits, giving, no doubt, on further ramifications. The beams of the flashlights half dislodged the flapping shadows of shelved recesses, caught the salience of far walls that climbed and beetled into inaccessible gloom, played on the creatures that went to and fro like monstrous living fungi, gave to a brief visual existence the pale and polyp-like plants that clung noisomely to the nighted stone. The place was overpowering. It oppressed the senses, crushed the brain. The very stone was like an embodiment of darkness, and light and vision were ephemeral intruders in this domain of the blind. Somehow, the Earthmen were weighed down by a conviction that escape was impossible. A strange lethargy claimed them. They did not even discuss their situation, but stood listless and silent. Anon, from the filthy gloom, a number of the Martians reappeared. With the same suggestion of controlled automatism that had marked all their actions, they gathered about the men once more and urged them into the yawning cavern. Step by step, the three were borne along in that weird and leprous procession. The obscene columns multiplied. The cave deepened before them with endless vistas, like a revelation of foul things that drowse at the nadir of night. Faintly at first, but more strongly as they went on, there came to them an insidious feeling of somnolence, such as might have been caused by mephitical effluvia. They rebelled against it, for the drowsiness was somehow dark and evil. It grew heavier upon them, and then they came to the core of the horror. Between the thick and seemingly topless pillars, the floor ascended in an altar of 7 oblique and pyramidal tiers. On the top, there squatted an image of pale metal, a thing no larger than a hair, but monstrous beyond all imagining. The Martians crowded about the Earthmen. One of them took Bellman by the arm, as if urging him to climb the altar. With the slow steps of a dreamer, he mounted the sloping tiers, and Chivers and Maspic followed. The image resembled nothing they had ever seen on the Red Planet, or elsewhere. It was carven of whitish gold, and it represented a humped animal with a smooth and overhanging carapace, from beneath which its head and members issued in tortoise fashion. The head was venomously flat, triangular, and eyeless. From the drooping corners of the cruelly slitted mouth, 2 long proboscides curved upward, hollow and cup-like at the ends. The thing was furnished with a series of short legs, issuing at uniform intervals from under the carapace, and a curious double tail was coiled and braided beneath its crouching body. The feet were round and had the shape of small, inverted goblets. Unclean and bestial as a figment of some atavistic madness, the eidolon seemed to drowse on the altar. It troubled the mind with a slow, insidious horror. It assailed the senses with an emanating stupor, an effluence as of primal worlds before the creation of light, where life might teem and raven slothfully in the blind ooze. Dimly the Earthmen saw that the altar swarmed with the blind Martians, who were crowding past them about the image, as if in some fantastic ritual of touch. These creatures were fondling the eidolon with their lank fingers, were tracing its loathsome outlines. Upon their brutal faces a narcotic ecstasy was imprinted. Compelled like sleepers in some abhorrent dream, Bellman, Chivers, and Maspic followed their example. The thing was cold to the touch and clammy, as if it had lain recently in a bed of slime. But it seemed to live, to throb and swell under their fingertips. From it, in heavy, ceaseless waves, a dark vibration surged, an opiate power that clouded the eyes, that poured its baleful slumber into the blood. With senses that swam in a strange darkness, they were vaguely aware of the pressure of thronging bodies that displaced them at the altar summit. Anon, certain of these, recoiling as if satiate with the drug-like effluence, bore them along the oblique tiers to the cavern floor. Still retaining their torches in nerveless fingers, they saw that the place teemed with the white people who had gathered for that unholy ceremony. Through blackening blurs of shadow, the men watched them as they seethed up and down on the pyramid like a leprous living frieze. Chivers and Maspic, yielding first to the influence, slid to the floor in utter sopor. But Bellman, more resistant, seemed to fall and drift through a world of lightless dreams. His sensations were anomalous, unfamiliar to the last degree. Everywhere there was a brooding, palpable power for which he could find no visual image, a power that exhaled a miasmal slumber. In those dreams, by insensible graduations, forgetting the last glimmer of his human self, he somehow identified himself with the eyeless people. He lived and moved as they, in profound caverns, on nighted roads. And yet he was something else, an entity without name that ruled over the blind, and was worshipped by them, a thing that dwelt in the ancient putrescent waters, in the nether deep, and came forth at intervals to raven unspeakably. In that duality of being, he sated himself at blind feasts, and was also devoured. With all this, like a third element of identity, the eidolon was associated, but only a tactile sense, and not as an optic memory. There was no light anywhere, and not even the recollection of light. Whether he passed from these obscure nightmares into dreamless slumber, he could not know. His awakening, dark and lethargic, was like a continuation of the dreams at first. Then, opening his sodden lids, he saw the shaft of light that lay on the floor front his fallen torch. The light poured against something that he could not recognize in his drugged awareness, yet it troubled him, and a dawning horror touched his faculties into life. By degrees, it came to him that the thing he saw was the half-eaten body of one of the eyeless troglodytes. Some of the members were missing, and the remainder was gnawed even to the curiously articulated bones. Bellman rose unsteadily and looked about with eyes that still held a web-like blurring of shadow. Chevers and Maspic lay beside him in heavy stupor, and along the cavern and upon the seven-tiered altar were sprawled the devotees of the somnific image. His other senses began to awake from their lethargy, and he thought that he heard a noise that was somehow familiar, a sharp slithering, together with a measured sucking. The sound withdrew among the massy pillars beyond the sleeping bodies. A smell as of rotten water tinged the air, and he saw that there were many curious rings of wetness on the stone, such as might be made by the rims of inverted cups. Preserving the order of footprints, they led away from the half-devoured Martian into the shadows of that outer cave, which verged upon the abyss, the direction in which the queer noise had passed, sinking now to inaudibility. In Bellman's mind, a mad terror rose and struggled with a spell that still benumbed him. He stooped down above Maspic and Chivers and shook them roughly in turn, till they opened their eyes and began to protest with drowsy murmurs. "Get up, damn you," he admonished them. "If we're ever to escape from this hellhole, now's the time." By dint of many oaths and objurgations and much muscular effort, he succeeded in getting his companions to their feet. Lurching drunkenly, they followed Bellman among the sprawled Martians, away from the pyramid on which the eidolon of white gold still brooded in malign somnolence above its worshippers. A clouding heaviness hung upon Bellman, but somehow there was a relaxation of the opiate spell. He felt a revival of volition and a great desire to escape from the gulf and from all that dwelt in its darkness. The others, more deeply enslaved by the drowsy power, accepted his leadership and guidance in a numb, brute-like fashion. He felt sure that he could retrace the route by which they had approached the altar. This, it seemed, was also the course that had been taken by the maker of the ring-like marks of fetid wetness. Wandering on amid the repugnantly carven columns for what seemed an
Let that be a lesson to Elon Musk's
verge, that portus of the Black Tartarus,
adventurous people
down on its ultimate gulf. Far beneath,
for landing on
those
Mars.
putrefying waters, the phosphorescence ran in widening circles, as if troubled by the
Don't
plunge
go
of
in
a
the
heavy body.
caves.
To the very edge, at their feet, the watery rings were imprinted on the rock. They turned away, Bellman shuddering with half-memories of his blind dreams and the terror of his awakening, found at the cave's corner the beginning of that upward road which skirted the abyss, the road that would take them back to the lost sun. At his injunction, Maspic and Chivers turned off their flashlights to conserve the batteries. It was doubtful how much longer these would last, and light was their prime necessity. His own torch would serve for the three, till it became exhausted. There was no sound or stirring of life from that cave of lightless sleep, where the Martians lay about the narcotizing image. But a fear such as he had never felt in all his adventurings caused Bellman to sicken and turn faint as he listened at its threshold. The gulf, too, was silent, and the circles of phosphor had ceased to widen on the waters. Yet somehow the silence was a thing that clogged the senses, retarded the limbs. It rose up around Bellman like the clutching slime of some nethermost pit in which he must drown. With dragging effort he began the ascent, hauling, cursing, and kicking his companions till they responded like drowsy animals. It was a climb through limbo, an ascent from nadir, through darkness that seemed palpable and viscid. On and up they toiled, along the monotonous, imperceptibly winding grade, where all measure of distance was lost, and time was meted only by the repetition of eternal steps. The night lowered before Bellman's feeble shaft of light. It closed behind like an all-engulfing sea, relentless and patient, biding its time till the torch should go out. Looking over the verge at intervals, Bellman saw the gradual fading of the phosphorescence in the depths. Fantastic images rose in his mind. It was like the last glimmering of hellfire in some extinct inferno, like the drowning of nebulae in voids beneath the universe. He felt the giddiness of one who looks down upon infinite space. Anon, there was only blackness, and he knew by this token the awful distance they had climbed. The minor urges of hunger, thirst, fatigue had been trod under by the fear that impelled him. From Maspic and Chivers, very slowly, the clogging stupor lifted, and they too were conscious of an adumbration of terror vast as the night itself. The blows and kicks and objurgations of Bellman were no longer needed to drive them on. Evil, ancient, soporous, the night hung about them. It was like the thick and fetid fur of bats, a material thing that choked the lungs, that deadened all the senses. It was silent as the slumber of dead worlds. But out of that silence, after the lapse of apparent years, a twofold and familiar sound arose and overtook the fugitives. The sound of something that slithered over stone, far down in the abyss. The sucking noise of a creature that withdrew its feet as if from a quagmire. Inexplicable, and arousing mad, incongruous ideas, like a sound heard in delirium. It quickened the Earthman's terror into sudden frenzy. God, what is it? Breathed Bellman. He seemed to remember sights of things, abhorrent, palpable shapes of primal night, that were no legitimate part of his recollection. His dreams and his nightmare awakening in the cave, the white eidolon, the half-eaten troglodyte of the nether cliffs, the rings of wetness leading toward the gulf, all returned like the figments of a teeming madness, all to assail him on that terrible road midway between the underworld sea and the surface of Mars. His question was answered only by a continuation of the noise. It seemed to grow louder, to ascend the wall beneath. Maspic and Chivers, snapping on their lights, began to run with frantic leaps, and Bellman, losing his last remnant of control, followed suit. It was a race with unknown horror. Above the labored beating of their hearts, the measured thudding of their feet, the men still heard that sinister, unaccountable sound. They seemed to race on through leagues of blackness, and yet the noise drew nearer, climbing below them, as if its maker were a thing that walked on the sheer cliff. Now the sound was appallingly close, and a little ahead, it ceased abruptly. The running lights of Maspic and Chivers, who moved abreast, discovered the crouching thing that filled the 2-yard shelf from side to side.
Which
Ardent
could not
adventurers though
be.
they were, the men would have shrieked aloud with hysteria, or would have hurled themselves from the precipice if the sight had not induced a kind of catalepsy. It was as if the pale idol of the pyramid, swollen to mammoth proportions and loathsomely alive, had come up from the abyss and was squatting before them.
Hi, Anthony.
Here, plainly, was the creature that had served as a model for that atrocious image. The humped, enormous carapace, vaguely recalling the armor of the glyptodont, shone with a luster as of wet white gold. The eyeless head, alert but somnolent, was thrust forward on a neck that arched obscenely. A dozen or more of short legs with goblet-shaped feet protruded slantwise beneath the overhanging shell. The two proboscides, yard-long with cupped ends, arose from the corners of the cruelly slitted mouth and waved slowly in air toward the Earthmen. The thing, it seemed, was old as that dying planet, an unknown form of primal life that had dwelt
Welcome
always
in,
in
Anthony.
the caverned waters. Before it, the faculties of the Earthmen were drugged by an evil stupor, such as they had felt before the Eidolon. They stood with their flashlights playing full on the terror, and they could not move nor cry out when it reared suddenly erect, revealing its ridged belly and the queer double tail that slithered and rustled metallically on the rock. Its numerous feet, beheld in this posture, were hollow and chalice-like, and they oozed with mephitic wetness. No doubt they served for suction pads, enabling it to walk on a perpendicular surface. Inconceivably swift and sure in all its motions, with short strides on its hindmost legs levered by the tail, the monster came forward on the helpless men.
We've got our
Unerringly, the
large
two
rover
proboscides
done
curved over,
and armored.
and their ends came down on Chivers's eyes as he stood with lifted face. They rested there, covering the entire sockets, for a moment only. Then there was an agonizing scream, as the hollow tips were withdrawn with a sweeping movement, lithe and vigorous as the lashing of serpents. Chivers swayed slowly, nodding his head,
I really
twisting
decided
about in
on
half-narcotized
anything to
pain.
work on.
Maspic, standing at his side, saw in a dull and dreamlike manner the gaping orbits from which the eyes were gone. It was the last thing that he ever saw. At that instant, the monster turned from Chivers, and the terrible cups dripping with blood and fetor descended on Maspic's own eyes. Bellman, who had paused close behind the others, comprehended what was occurring like one who witnesses the abominations of a nightmare, but is powerless to intervene or flee. He saw the movements of the capped members. He heard the single atrocious cry that was wrung from Chivers, and the swiftly ensuing scream of Maspic. Then, above the heads of his fellows, who still held their useless torches in rigid fingers, the proboscides came toward him, with blood rilling heavily upon their faces, with the somnolent, vigilant, implacable, and eyeless shape at their heels, herding them on, restraining them when they tottered at the brink. The three began their second descent of the road that went down forever to a night-bound Avernus.
They thought they got away, but they did not.
The Vaults of Yovombus. Preface. As an intern in the terrestrial hospital at Ignar, I had charge of the singular case of Rodney 7, the one surviving member of the Octave expedition to Yovombus, and took down the following story from his dictation. 7 had been brought to the hospital by the Martian guides of the expedition. He was suffering from a horribly lacerated and inflamed condition of the scalp and brow, and was wildly delirious part of the time, and had to be held down in his bed during recurrent seizures of a mania whose violence was doubly inexplicable in view of his extreme debility. The lacerations, as will be learned from the story, were mainly self-inflicted. They were mingled with numerous small round wounds,
I'll
easily
be
distinguished from
right
the
back.
nail slashes,
I'm gonna go
and
grab a
arranged in
fresh
regular
drink
circles,
and use the
through which an
restroom.
unknown poison had been injected
Enjoy the
into
story
Severn's
while
scalp.
we
The causation
refine
of these
some
wounds was
ore.
difficult to explain, unless one were to believe that Severn's story was true and was no mere figment of his illness. Speaking for myself, in the light of what afterwards occurred, I feel that I have no other recourse than to believe it. There are strange things on the Red Planet, and I can only second the wish that was expressed by the doomed archaeologist in regard to future explorations. The night after he finished telling me his story, while another doctor than myself was supposedly on duty, Severn managed to escape from the hospital, doubtless in one of the strange seizures at which I've hinted. A most astonishing thing, for he had seemed weaker than ever after the long strain of his terrible narrative, and his demise had been hourly expected. More astonishing still, his bare footsteps were found in the desert, going toward Yovombis, till they vanished in the path of a light sandstorm, but no trace of Severn himself has yet been discovered. The narrative of Rodney Severn. If the doctors are correct in their prognostication, I have only a few Martian hours of life remaining to me. In those hours, I shall endeavor to relate, as a warning to others who might follow in our footsteps, the singular and frightful happenings that terminated our researches among the ruins of Yovombis. Somehow, even in my extremity, I shall contrive to tell the story, since there is no one else to do it. But the telling will be toilsome and broken, and after I am done, the madness will recur, and several men will restrain me, lest I should leave the hospital and return across many desert leagues to those abominable vaults beneath the compulsion of the malignant and malevolent virus which is permeating my brain. Perhaps death will release me from that abhorrent control, which would urge me down to bottomless underworld warrens of terror for which the saner planets of the solar system can have no analogue. I say perhaps, for, remembering what I have seen, I am not sure that even death will end my bondage. There were 8 of us, professional archaeologists with more or less terrene and interplanetary experience, who set forth with native guides from Ignar, the commercial metropolis of Mars, to inspect that ancient, eon-deserted city. Alan Octave, our official leader, held his primacy by virtue of knowing more about Martian archaeology than any other terrestrial on the planet, and others of the party, such as William Harper and Jonas Halgren, had been associated with him in many of his previous researches. I, Rodney Severn, was more of a newcomer, having spent but a few months on Mars, and the greater part of my own ultra-terrene delvings had been confined to Venus. I had often heard of Yovombis in a vague and legendary sort of manner, and never at first hand. Even the ubiquitous Octave had never seen it. Builded by an extinct people whose history has been lost in the latter decadent eras of the planet, it remains a dim and fascinating riddle whose solution has never been approached, and which, I trust, may endure forevermore unsolved by man. Certainly, I hope that no one will ever follow in our steps. Contrary to the impression we had received from Martian stories, we found that the semi-fabulous ruins lay at no great distance from Ignar, with its terrestrial colony and consulates. The nude, spongy-chested natives had spoken deterringly of vast deserts filled with ever-swirling sandstorms, through which we must pass to reach Yovombis, and in spite of our munificent offers of payment, it had been difficult to secure guides for the journey. We had provisioned ourselves amply and had prepared for all emergencies that might eventuate during a long trip. Therefore, we were pleased as well as surprised when we came to the ruins after 7 hours of plodding across the flat, treeless, orange-yellow desolation to the southwest of Ignar. On account of the lesser gravity, the journey was far less tiring than one who is unfamiliar with Martian conditions might expect, but because of the thin, Himalaya-like air and the possible strain on our hearts, we had been careful not to hasten. Our coming to Yovombis was sudden and spectacular. climbing the low slope of a league-long elevation of bare and deeply eroded stone, we saw before us the shattered walls of our destination, whose highest tower was notching the small, remote sun that glared in stifled crimson through the floating haze of fine sand. For a little, we thought that the domeless, three-angled towers and broken-down monoliths were those of some unlegended city, other than the one we sought. But the disposition of the ruins, which lay in a sort of arc for almost the entire extent of the low and Nysic elevation, together with the type of architecture, soon convinced us that we had found our goal. No other ancient city on Mars had been laid out in that manner, and the strange, many-terraced buttresses of the thick walls, like the stairways of forgotten Anakim, were peculiar to the prehistoric race that had built Yorvombis. Moreover, Yorvombis was the one remaining example of this architecture, aside from a few fragments in the neighborhood of Ignar, which we had previously examined. I have seen the hoary, sky-confronting walls of Machu Picchu amid the desolate Andes, and the teocallis that are buried in the Mexican jungles, and I have seen the frozen, giant-builded battlements of Ugum on the glacial tundras of the nightward hemisphere of Venus. But these were as things of yesteryear, bearing at least the memory or the intimation of life, compared with the awesome and lithiferous antiquity, the cycle-enduring doom of a petrified sterility that seemed to invest Yorvombis. The whole region was far from the life-giving canals, beyond whose environs even the more noxious flora and fauna are seldom found, and we had seen no living thing since our departure from Ignar. But here, in this place of eternal bareness and solitude, it seemed that life could never have been. The stark, eroded stones were things that might have been reared by the toil of the dead, to house the monstrous ghouls and demons of primal desolation. I think we all received the same impression, as we stood staring in silence while the pale, Sannies-like sunset fell on the dark and megalithic ruins. I remember gasping a little, in an air that seemed to have been touched by the irrespirable chill of death, and I heard the same sharp, laborious intake of breath from others of our party. That place is deader than an Egyptian morgue, observed Harper. Certainly it is far more ancient, Octave assented. According to the most reliable legends, the Yoris who built Yorvombis were wiped out by the present ruling race at least 40,000 years ago. There's a story, isn't there, said Harper, that the last remnant of the Yoris was destroyed by some unknown agency. Something too horrible and outre to be mentioned even in a myth. Of course, I've heard that legend, agreed Octave. Maybe we'll find evidence among the ruins to prove or disprove it. The Yoris may have been cleaned out by some terrible epidemic, such as the Yashta pestilence, which was a kind of green mold that ate all the bones of the body, starting with the teeth and nails. But we needn't be afraid of getting it. If there are any mummies in Yorvombis, the bacteria will all be dead as their victims after so many cycles of planetary desiccation. Anyway, there ought to be a lot for us to learn. The Ahai have always been more or less shy of the place. Few have ever visited it, and none, as far as I can find, have made a thorough examination of the ruins. The sun had gone down with uncanny swiftness, as if it had disappeared through some sort of prestidigitation rather than the normal process of setting. We felt the instant chill of the blue-green twilight, and the ether above us was like a huge, transparent dome of sunless ice, shot with a million bleak sparklings that were the stars. We donned the coats and helmets of Martian fur, which must always be worn at night, and going on to westward of the walls, we established our camp in their lee, so that we might be sheltered a little from the jar, that cruel desert wind that always blows from the east before dawn. Then, lighting the alcohol lamps that had been brought along for cooking purposes, we huddled around them while the evening meal was prepared and eaten. Afterwards, for comfort rather than because of weariness, we retired early to our sleeping bags, and the two Ahai, our guides, wrap themselves in the cerament-like folds of grey bassa cloth, which are all the protection their leathery skins appear to require, even in sub-zero temperatures. Even in my thick, double-lined bag, I still felt the rigor of the night air, and I'm sure it was this, rather than anything else, which kept me awake for a long while, and rendered my eventual slumber somewhat restless and broken. Of course, the strangeness of our situation and the weird proximity of those Aeonian walls and towers may in some measure have contributed to my unrest. But at any rate, I was not troubled by even the least presentiment of alarm or danger, and I should have laughed at the idea that anything of peril could lurk in Yovomis, amid whose undreamable and stupefying antiquities the very phantoms of its dead must long since have faded into nothingness. I remember little, however, except the feeling of interminable duration that often marks a shallow and interrupted sleep. I recall the marrow-piercing wind that moaned above us toward midnight, and the sand that stung my face like a fine hail as it passed, blowing from desert to immemorial desert. And I recall the still, inflexible stars that grew dim for a while with that fleeing ancient dust. Then the wind went by, and I drowsed again with starts of semi-wakefulness. At last, in one of these, I knew vaguely that the small twin moons, Phobos and Deimos, had risen and were making huge and spectral shadows with the ruins, and were casting an ashen glimmer on the shrouded forms of my companions. I must have been half asleep, for the memory of that which I saw is doubtful